Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Niles and I have an absolutely extraordinary Bigfoot encounter to share with you that I consider to be one of a kind. My Bigfoot encounter happened in 1987 in the Ozarks when I was 30 years old at the time. Growing up, I'd always been considered the type of person that would never ever get married. My friends just believed I was not the settling down type. I'd independently travelled extensively, especially all over North America. I loved camping, fishing, mountain climbing and canoeing. I taught wilderness survival skills once a week and also assisted the Boy Scouts from time to time, teaching them techniques such as tying knots and making campfires. I was in my element because I loved everything to do with the great outdoors, and life was an enormous adventure for me. Of course, at the time I was interested in girls, but dating was not something that actually appealed to me, and I was a disaster at chatting up girls. My biggest problem was that I was painfully shy, self-effacing, and exceedingly reserved. I was not a bad-looking fellow, and some women described me as a great catch, because I was rugged and handsome, 6 foot tall, an athletic build, dark hair and blue eyes. However, good looks are not enough to land you a good girl. It also requires the skill of a seductive, charming tongue, something I clearly lacked in my repertoire. I had been on multiple dates, all with disastrous, unfavourable outcomes. One woman went so far as to escape from me during our dinner by excusing herself by going to the bathroom and climbing through the back toilet window at the restaurant and making a hasty escape. We had sat there in cumbersome, somewhat awkward silence for a very long time, and I didn't know what the heck to say. And I know I appeared standoffish because I was so reticent and repressed. I remember I was completely tongue-tied at the time. I must have come across as a complete fumbling idiot, so I cannot say I blame her for running off like that. I gather she told her girlfriends that she would have had more fun with a piranha than with someone as timid and skittish as I was, because to her the gawky silence over dinner was utterly deafening. On another date, in agonizing nervous attempt to make polite, meaningful conversation, I commented on how much the woman was actually enjoying her food, and I meant it as a big compliment. I proceeded to boldly say that I could tell she loved her food because she looked remarkably healthy. The woman then threw a glass of wine in my face and told me she did not need a jerk like me in her life, and how dare I call her fat. I was not even suggesting she was fat, but there I was, putting my foot in it all over again. Then on another date set up for me by a friend of mine, it also inauspiciously ended in disaster. The woman was so fussy and punctilious about her order and kept sending all her dishes back to the kitchen, complaining bitterly all the time. I told you I want the dressing separate from the salad. Not on the salad. Are you stupid or what? She said to the waitress, explaining to me that she couldn't abide airheads. The waitress brought her the salad again with the dressing on the side that she had insisted upon, along with a glass of lemonade that she had also ordered. Once again my date exploded, saying, I told you I did not want a lemon piece in my lemonade. Why did you not listen? Are you deaf or something? I remember the poor waitress looked so belittled and humiliated as my dates caused such a commotion about absolutely everything that even the customers at other tables were looking at each other and whispering among themselves, drawing uncomfortable attention to our table, which I could have well done without because I'm not the most attention-seeking exhibitionist at the best of times. When the waitress brought our main course, my date started to shriek at the waitress like a headmistress lecturing a pupil for very bad behaviour. I told you that I do not want any butter on my chicken breast. That's not butter, the waitress insisted. It's just lemon juice with a touch of parsley in it, I promise you. Do I look stupid? Went on my date in a raised voice. The waitress shook her head. Good, she said. Now take my chicken back and make it the way I ordered it. I watched the waitress scuttle away with a terrified look on her face, and her eyes were brimming with tears. Do you not think you were a little hard on the poor girl? I asked, leaping to the waitress's defence. I mean, she's trying her very best to give us good service, and I think she's doing a great job. She's trying very hard to please us. My date gasped at me in horror. You are taking sides with the waitress, she said. That's appalling. I'm your date, and you're treating that airhead better than me. You disgust me. You clearly do not know how to treat a lady right, she said. I watched her rising from her seat, grabbing her handbag and thrusting it under her arm. Right, I'm out of here, she said, storming out of the restaurant in a huff, making a huge spectacle of herself as she swaggered off, delighting in the attention she was arousing among all the customers. Tell that friend of yours to stop setting me up on such crap dates, she hissed, and she finally left the premises. I still remember an elderly couple looking at me so piteously on the opposite table, and the purple-rinsed elderly woman whispered to me, You're better off without him, love. I settled the bill and raced out of the restaurant as fast as I possibly could. I don't think I've ever been so humiliated in my entire life. In that moment I decided that I would never, ever date again. One day at a local diner with a friend of mine called Mike, I met a very attractive brunette, a waitress called Celeste, and we went on a couple of dates together. She was a garrulous yet charming woman who loved talking about herself, which helped me significantly with my painful, reticent shyness, and to make matters even better, she never asked me about myself at all. At that time I did consider her lack of interest in me not a bad thing at all, because I absolutely hated talking about myself. I was young and naive at the time, so when she announced that we were going to get married a few months later, I guess I just went along with it. No one was more surprised than my betting friends, who had never believed it was remotely possible that I would ever tie the knot, given my painful, awkward shyness with women, and my huge passion for solo adventures in the American wilderness. Hardly an aspiring resume for a potential husband. Celeste and I settled down in a small apartment in Seattle that she turned into a cosy, glamorous den with designer furnishings and stylish wallpapers and fabrics. Celeste loved spending many nights out with her girlfriends, and never minded me sauntering off on my wilderness excursions because she relished her own space. The reality was that at times in our lives we were sometimes like water and oil, and we didn't always mix together all that well. Well, not at that time anyway. I was a manager at the time for a wilderness camping shop, selling all kinds of curious camping gear to outdoorsy, adventurous types of people, while Celeste was an interior designer helping people to recreate a glamorous home, and some of her clients were affluent, high society types that earned a great deal of money. I was passionate about my job because the store I worked for sold everything from rifles for hunting, outdoor clothes, hiking shoes, fishing rods, tackle, and all the accessories you could possibly need for camping. I would meet people like myself who were so passionate and excited about the great outdoors, and so my job always involved listening to the stories from people's camping adventures, and believe me, there were many, from strange ghostly encounters to weird sightings of unusual creatures and odd things that happened to them while they were camping. When I would return home at night to Celeste, she would happily talk about herself, prepare a delicious meal for the both of us, telephone her friends, and talk on the telephone for absolute ages about seemingly nothing of any real relevance at all. Then she would retire to bed or watch a little television with me. We really didn't communicate much in those days, nor did we share any interest in common, as Celeste was a social butterfly at the time, and I was introverted and outdoorsy. It was like we were two ships at the time passing in the night that didn't have much interaction together, but I always hoped that one day that would change. On one occasion, Celeste did present me with a hefty life insurance policy to sign. I think given the fact that you're always going off on wilderness excursions, I think it's wise to take out this policy, she advised me. If something dreadful, accidental or fortuitous were to happen to you, God forbid, and you were attacked by a bear or plunged to your death in attempting to climb a high ravine, I don't want to be left penniless, picking up the pieces of my life, especially if I'm a mother with children at the time. That would be awful. What she said was pragmatic and made perfect sense to me, so I signed the life insurance policy willingly, as protecting my wife was a circumspect decision for any man in my position to make. As an outdoorsy type, I had experienced many near-fatal misses in my life that could ultimately have resulted in premature death. I hardly wanted poor Celeste to be an early widow, given that many of my ventures did involve high-scale, sometimes perilous risks. On one occasion I was nearly killed by a black bear, but I successfully played dead, and he lost interest in me. Another time I was stranded in an icy cold Arctic conditions after a nasty fall, and ended up nearly dying of hypothermia, and spent several weeks recuperating in hospital. One day I told my wife Celeste that I was going on a solo camping trip to the Ozarks, and as usual she was fine about my going. On the contrary, she seemed delighted to have me out of her hair for a whole week. I noticed that she seemed unusually interested about whereabouts I would be camping in the Ozarks, so I pointed to her an area on my map where I intended to go exploring. I was actually so pleased that she was showing some interest in my adventure and asking me so many curious questions about my trip and what I intended to do, as that was so out of character for her to appear so enthralled in my outdoor activities. Maybe she was becoming more inquisitive in my pursuits of my outdoor life, I thought happily to myself. Fast forward a couple of days and I was in my utter element. I was in the Ozarks, also known as the Ozark Mountain or Ozark Plateau, in the psychographic region of Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and the southeast corner of Kansas. The rocks that initially formed the Ozarks are made from sand and silt, with remains of marine animals that were laid down in a shallow sea about 542 million years ago. You can see some of the plant and marine-like fossils embedded within the rocks there when you go swimming in the rock pools, and it is extremely fascinating. Personally, I adore the Ozarks, and this was not my first solo camping trip out there. I loved the rugged rocky terrain, the exquisite foaming white plunging waterfalls, the caverns and pools of exquisite cool water, surrounded by magnificent rocky formations, often embedded with fossils like seashells and plant material. I also loved the rich terrain of the forest that consisted of primary white oaks, hickory and short-leaved pine, along with the river beds where you could find river birch, maple, sycamore, redbud and dogwood. The area was also teeming with wild animals from muskrats, deer, bobcats, otters, bats, and the occasional odd black bear. You also have to watch out for venomous snakes, like the cottonhead, coppermouth, and rattlesnakes, and invariably if you're swimming in one of those glorious rock pools, you'll often spot water snakes skirting across the water, which, believe me, is not an uncommon sight, and is very likely to be seen. It was on the third night camping, and it was very hot, humid, and muggy, which is pretty standard for the Ozarks in the middle of summer, even though tropical rain was common in these parts during the summer, so it could become cloudy and overcast very suddenly. I'm glad to say that luckily I'd not experienced a downfall yet. I was enjoying sleeping in an open hammock under the silvery stars at night. I set up in my sleeping quarters in a very inconspicuous, discreet private area between two white oak trees that were well hidden and extremely well camouflaged. The site was absolutely perfect because it overlooked a large rocky clearing over exquisite waterfalls and the most glorious rock pool that was the most incredible place to cool off in on a hot, scorching summer's day. What could be better? I hadn't prepared a tent for myself because I was really roughing it caveman style. I hid my huge rucksack under piles of leaves so that it remained invisible. I did not want my presence to be clear to the natural wildlife in the area because when they sense humans are around, they keep a very safe distance. I loved wildlife and was desirous to be one with nature, so blending in with my environment was significant to me. It would seem that despite my near-death experience with a bear once, it had done little to curtail my huge appreciation for animals, and I could quite literally watch animals for hours through my binoculars, and if they sensed my presence, they would not hang around for very long, because invariably they are skittish around humans, and rightfully so. It was about 12 o'clock at night when I awoke, feeling incredibly hot, sticky, sweaty and clammy, so I decided to take a dip in the cool water at the rock pool. And as I plunged into the water, I felt so refreshed and invigorated. And then I heard it. It was the sound of 2 pairs of bipedal feet rushing through the undergrowth, walking towards the rock pool where I was actually swimming. I immediately hid in the water under the rocky ledge, taking care not to be observed. It was then that I saw 2 men, who appeared to be wearing military-style camouflage clothing known as fatigues, carrying powerful rifles in their hands. It was the conversations that they were having together that made my blood run cold. They were standing so close to where I was hiding that I could have literally reached out to touch their ankles if I'd wanted to. "Where the heck is he? How the hell are we going to take him down if we can't even locate him?" one of the men was saying. "I was informed that he's located in this area and should not be difficult to spot," came another man's voice. "Well, we need to get the job done as soon as possible on Maxwell's strict orders, ASAP. Do you understand?" As I was listening to this conversation, I suddenly remembered the life insurance policy that Celeste had urged me to take out, and now I was listening to 2 men discussing how they were going to murder me. I was utterly horrified. Could this really be happening to me? My heart was racing and my hair stood up on the back of my neck. I felt so violently sick, I just wanted to throw up. I had heard of women who had killed their husbands for life insurance policies before, but I would never have considered Celeste to be that vindictive, malign or evil type of woman who was out for insatiably everything she could get her indulgent hands on. Clearly I did not know her at all. I watched the men scouting the area and was so relieved that all my camping gear was so well concealed that you would have been forgiven for believing that the whole area was devoid of human habitation. I'd always camped this way before, and now this way of camping was quite literally saving my life. I've always had really great tracking skills, and so I wanted to find out as much as possible as I could about these men. Who on earth was Celeste hiring to kill me? It was absolutely extraordinary that she was going to such extreme lengths to do away with me. I knew I wasn't the greatest husband, but was a huge life insurance policy payout more pleasurable for her than my presence in her life? Such horrendous revelations was a huge slap in the face for me, as I began to realize what a sham my marriage actually appeared to have become. Just when I thought things were looking more promising in our relationship of late. The following day I was very cautious about all my activities, making sure that I did not do anything that could attract attention to myself, and I then heard the men all over again. This time I was in my hammock, well concealed from the clearing. Once again the men were walking towards the same rock pool where I had been swimming the previous night. "Where the hell is he?" I heard one of the men say. "How can something leave no trail whatsoever? How is that even possible?" "Well, maybe he knows we're trying to hunt him down." "I'm the best tracker in the business. I cannot go back to the base and admit that I've failed on this expedition. Failure's not an option for me. That's not going to look good on my meticulous military record. Maxwell has put his full trust in my professional expertise because he knows I can be relied upon to take care of business with no awkward questions asked. I'm considered the most reliable tracker in the military. Read the details again. I want to see if I've overlooked anything." The other man, who I will call George for the purposes of my story, fumbled around in his fatigued trouser pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper that had clearly seen better days. He unrolled the paper and read the following. It's Operation Ozark Giant, sir. It's a tall human ape-like creature, sir, approximately 10 foot tall and 1,000 pounds and 5 foot wide, sir. It has 22-inch human-like footprints, sir, and is covered in head to toe with thick black hair, sir. It's powerful, strong, and exceedingly dangerous, with a very potent odour, and it's elusive, sir. Your instructions are to kill it, along with any existing family members, sir, if any are, of course, found. Best locations to look for it are around the Ozark waterfalls, open rock pools, nearby forest or caves, and look out for broken tree stumps and arched pieces of timber, sir. The other military man, who I will call Mike, stroked his moustache in a gesture of thoughtful contemplation. I wonder why they want us to take him down. I wonder what he's done. Has the creature harmed anyone or caused any mischief? It strikes me that the report is extremely vague. Even that rogue bear that I took down last summer that was causing problems to the locals in the area had a better report than this one is, which is about as indefinite as you can get. The whole thing strikes me as a rather spineless joke. What's the name of the giant creature, did you say? Sasquatch, sir. Mountain giant, said George. Give me the map again, snapped Mike. Where are we? I think we're at this precise point, sir, he said, noting it on the map. Maybe we should turn more to the eastern side of the valley. I think we've not investigated that area thoroughly enough. We can set up camp there tonight, and we can set up a night patrol, sir. I think the creature could potentially be nocturnal, which may be why he has eluded us so far. If he is intelligent, which is a very high probability, considering his distinct humanness, he could be erasing his footprints if he suspects that we are tracking him. Good point. But if this creature is as intelligent as you suppose he is, this expedition is turning out to be a bloody needle in a haystack. How the heck are we to find such an elusive, clever, intelligent creature? You tell me that. Once the men had disappeared from sight, I realised to my huge relief that they weren't actually looking for me, but were hunting some kind of peculiar humanoid ape. I'd been wrong about Celeste. She hadn't been intending to get me killed after all, I thought with huge relief. I determined that these men must be from some military base of some kind, and it sounded exceedingly odd to me that they were looking for such an anomalous, strange-sounding creature. I had never heard of such an atypical beast existing here in North America before. I had explored North America so very well, and knew all the animals in explicit detail that frolicked our woods, and a humanoid ape was definitely not one of those critters that I had ever encountered in all my travels. Surely this was some great big wind-up, I thought, chuckling to myself. Yes, that's probably what it was. The military were well known for their warped sense of humour, but this was possibly taking things a teensy-weensy bit overboard as far as a wind-up was concerned. That night I retired to my hammock very early. I had made a fire pit as I knew these men were far away by now. I killed a rabbit and skinned it, roasting it over the grill and flavouring it with my mixed seasoning. It tasted exactly like roast chicken and was melt in the mouth, juicy and delicious. I immediately pulled my fire pit apart and smoothed the area down and covered myself with a natural citronella lemongrass insect repellent and proceeded to lie down in my hammock, covering myself with a sopping wet towel. It was such a hot, humid night, and very difficult to fall asleep when the weather is this clammy and unpleasant, and the flying, biting insects don't make life any easier either, as far as acquiring a good night's sleep is concerned. I did manage to drift off to sleep with the help of my wet towel that helped my body temperature to plummet, thus enabling me to get some well-needed shut-eye. I was suddenly awoken to the loud noise of splashing in the water, and I could hear this strange chattering sound that sounded as if someone was speaking gibberish, but it sounded like several people jabbering all at once in this very strange language. There was also a horrible stench in the air that smelt a little bit like sweaty trainers and wet dogs. What the heck, I thought to myself as I sprang into action and gathered my Remington rifle. I crept silently through the trees, taking fastidious care to be as soundless as I could. I stepped ever closer to the rocky pool with the magnificent white foaming cascading waterfalls, and that was when I saw them. There were 4 massive creatures that at first glance looked exactly like bears, but then I realized they were more like human giants, covered with long, flowing dark hair. They were all playing together in the rocky pool excitedly, chattering together garrulously in a language of some kind, and the dialogue was continuous, as they seemed to love to chat. I realized at once that it was a mother, father, and 2 children, and they were without doubt the humanoid apes that those military men had been authorized and instructed and commanded to kill by their superiors at a military base of some kind. This very thought made me sick to my stomach, because to me killing these creatures was unequivocally tantamount to murder. The behaviour of these remarkable, powerful, loftic humanoids was so human-like, it was extraordinary. I kept up close to the rock pool, hiding behind a large rocky outcrop to watch them very closely. They were the most unbelievable, exciting, curious creatures that I have ever encountered in my entire life, because they were incredibly intelligent. I was in luck because it was a bright full moon, and it was so light, and such a crisp, beautiful evening, with great visibility because of the starry firmament that provided the most phenomenal lighting over the rock pool. They clearly possessed human emotions and feelings, which was seen by the way they interacted together. They were tactile and affectionate, and very much a close, loving family unit. I could see that the alpha male, or father, was the authority, and he was titanic in his immense size and stature. I would say he was easily 11 foot tall, and well over 1,000 pounds, and possibly more, while the female was 8 foot, and the children only about 6 foot tall. The creatures were absolute incredible swimmers, and their long shaggy hair was surprisingly no hindrance at all to their swimming prowess and capability. I think they were hot on this muggy night, which was why they came to swim in the rock pool in the first place, and they all took it in turns to stand under the showering current of the waterfall. I could tell that they were really enjoying the feeling of the invigorating water pulsating across their bodies like an invigorating punneling massage. I noticed that their hairless grey faces were so human-like, but with a prominent brow ridge and very deep-set brown eyes that appeared to take on a red eye-shine in the dark. The critters were really enjoying themselves, splashing around in the water, and if you took away the long hair and reduced their sizes considerably, it would be no different to watching a human family interacting and playing together. Sometimes they would make these happy whooping sounds, which I would liken to jubilant, joyful human laughter. I watched the creatures climb out of the water with such grace and agility. They shook their shaggy-like coats like dogs, sending a shower of rain over a long rocky area. They continued to chatter together while gliding away on their long graceful legs, and they moved with such fluid grace and agility. They were superb to watch. Suddenly after they had gone, the revelation that these military men I had seen could potentially kill those beautiful creatures sent waves of horror and dread into every fibre of my being. It would be tantamount to murder in my book, and I knew that they had to be stopped. So I hatched up an inspirational, cunning plan in my head and went in search for the men, knowing that they were camping in an easterly direction. At first light I arose very early in the morning, and immediately, armed with my compass and map, I hiked for a few long hours with a rucksack on my back, until I found myself walking towards the campsite of the 2 military men. The 2 men appeared surprised to see me. "Who are you?" they asked me, looking at me in surprise. "Oh, I'm just solo camping out here," I said. "It's just nice to see another human face. It's been a long while, you see." I could see the men physically relax, and they warmly, cordially invited me to join them for a cup of tea around their fire pit. "So how long have you been out here?" Mike asked me curiously. "A while," I lied, "and I've seen some things I'd rather forget out here." "Such as what?" asked Mike, raising a quizzical eyebrow. "Well, you wouldn't believe me if I was to tell you," I said. "Tell us," said Mike, trying to hide his rising excitement that I could distinctly hear in his voice. "Well, I saw a couple of men killing a very big family of black, humanoid, hairy apes. I heard them say, We've cleaned the whole area out of these horrible critters," I said as I watched a horrified expression appear on Mike's face as he listened to me very intently. I continued, "I never knew that animals like this existed in North America before, but I did see these 4 dead corpses of these black hairy ape humanoids myself," I lied. "You saw them yourself? And are you sure they're dead?" asked Mike, failing to hide his delight. "Oh, yes," I said. "They were as dead as dodos, and these men loaded these colossal critters into a truck and sped away just like that." "Did they say where they were taking them?" asked Mike, looking frightfully concerned for a moment. "To be incinerated as quickly as possible," I said. "They wanted to keep what they'd done very, very hush-hush, away from prying and questioning human eyes, I gather, and they wanted me to keep my mouth shut too." "We believe your story," said Mike, looking very solemn, "but our advice is that you don't tell anyone what you saw, because people will think you're cuckoo and should be locked away in a loony bin, if you get my drift." "Oh, I do," I said. "Most certainly." "May I suggest that you don't tell anybody what you told us?" "Oh, you're right," I told them both. "I wouldn't tell anybody what I've told you. I think I just sensed you both would believe me, but normally I would never share such stories with anyone, lest they think I'm bonkers." "Glad to hear it," said Mike. "How can you be sure those creatures are dead?" he continued. "Are you really certain of this fact?" "I've been a hunter all my life," I said. "I think I can tell when an animal is dead or when it's just passed out." The men seemed satisfied by my adamancy. I drank my tea and ate a couple of chocolate biscuits that they had given me. I then left the men and thanked them for their hospitality, and then I proceeded to hide behind the cover of a tree to listen to their conversation and to make absolutely certain that they would not consider hunting down those beautiful humanoid apes. I hoped that my bogus story had convinced them that the humanoid apes were indeed dead. "Well, it would seem someone has taken care of our job for us," said Mike. "I told you that those critters were no longer around. I would have discovered their tracks by now. Did I not tell you? It's just as well we ran into the man, and he told us that the critters are clearly dead, or we could have been running around in circles for ages, looking for those things, with absolutely no results." "Yes, boss, it would appear so." "Now you're not to tell anyone that we did not kill those Ozark giants ourselves. We will simply tell them we've taken care of business. That's all we need to say. That way we'll be esteemed very highly and even promoted. So no divulging any details about this case. Do you understand? Why should some stranger take credit when the army would not know the difference anyway? So no spilling the beans. Get my drift?" "Oh, of course, sir," said George. "We'll simply say we attended to business, like you say, sir." "Good man," said Mike, tapping him on the back in a condescending way. "I knew I could trust you." I watched the 2 men pack away their tents into their rucksacks and leave the area, falsely believing that the humanoid apes had indeed been killed. So there you are. That's my extraordinary story. And I'm glad to say that I played my part in hopefully saving that beautiful family of forest giants that deserved a life just like the rest of us do. You'll be surprised to learn that all these years later I am still married to Celeste, and it would appear that over the years our relationship literally blossomed. Initially we had so very little in common, and it really looked doubtful that our relationship would work, but then suddenly one day it just did. I fell madly in love with her about 10 years into our marriage. She suddenly changed, and I guess I did too. Maybe we just grew up, matured, and instead of growing apart, we grew together. I think Celeste overcame her self-centered behavior and developed a more spiritual attitude to life. She developed into a very beautiful woman over the years, and I loved her more than ever. I always tell her that she improved with age, rather like a good quality wine. At first she was fruity, light, and rather naive, but now she's full-bodied, mature, and infinitely superior. I'm also glad to report that I do not go on camping trips alone these days, because Celeste has developed a passion for outdoor adventures and excursions, and she adores visiting the Ozarks as much as I do, and swimming in those glorious rock pools, and cooking gnocchi and garlic and parmesan in a pot over a warm grill. Oh, and I do still have a hefty life insurance policy taken out on me, but I assure you that if Celeste wanted to do away with me, she'd have done away with me a very long time ago. She relentlessly teases me about the time that I thought she had hired someone to kill me or do me in. I now know all these years later that the creatures I encountered in the Ozark were indeed Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti or hairy man, and I do realise how remarkably privileged I was to have such an amazing encounter with these incredible hairy critters that I believe are the most wonderful creatures. I am sure, much like the human species, you get good and bad creatures, but the family I watched playing in the rocky pool so happily together was no threat at all to human safety. I am certain of this fact, or I wouldn't have gone so far or to such extraordinary measures to protect them from the military. So that is my story.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, Paul Johnson stood in front of the vast ocean expanse of Ocean City in Maryland. He knew he shouldn't be here, but he'd made a quick diversion on this trip, and why not? Sometimes a touch of sea air could rarely heal the mind more efficiently than 1,000 psychologists. He had grown up here as a young boy. His childhood memories wistfully lingered over that broadwalk and the long ribbon of Golden Beach sand that stretched out before him for an eternity. By all accounts, it had been a good childhood, before his mother had so inauspiciously been taken from him. The poor unsuspecting woman, nimble but slight in her delicate frame, had been washed away by a heavy-duty tempestuous sea current when she went for an early morning dip, many years ago. Very early in the morning, when the sun had just risen over the escarpment, long before any of the tourists had risen from their beds, soon to congregate on the beach in large clustered gatherings to sunbathe on the sand and soak up the warm, glorious sunshine like hungry lizards. My mother had evaded it all to her detriment, as she abhorred crowds in every regard. Suffice to say, if she had been swimming at the right time of day, a pair of strong, sturdy arms from a strapping man would almost certainly have saved her life, as my mother's petite, slight form was no match for a powerful ocean wave, audaciously determined to sweep her further and further out to sea, fueled by powerful hostile wind currents. Paul was certain that every part of Ocean City absorbed the energy of those who had bathed their bodies in her salty waters here and sipped her clean, crisp, fresh air. Even though he'd been away from her for many years now, more than he cared to remember, there was something nostalgically evocative about this place that clawed itself under your skin, which had made Ocean City like home to him. Nowhere else in the entire planet hugged his wavering soul like Ocean City did. As a young boy, if his heart had ever been grievously discouraged, he had sought wise counsel from the ocean. For although she never physically aged, Paul knew that the ocean was the wisest, oldest soul on the planet. For water is the very embodiment of life itself, as even the human body is about 60% water. He saw the ocean as a living thing, with a pulse and a heartbeat, much like his own, from the glittering sun on its surface to the thriving dimensions below, as the sea to him represented majesty, mystery, abundant life, as every living thing on earth originated from this watery substance, upon which all life remains wholly dependent and attached. Against his better judgment, Paul was exceedingly grateful to have taken a diversion on this trip, rather than going straight to Ohio. It had been an off-the-cuff decision he certainly did not regret. It was a relief to be back at the only place in the world he truly regarded as home, for the essence of this place lingered in his DNA, with an indelible watermark that could not be shifted. It was certainly easier to procrastinate than to come to terms with everything that had transpired in the last tumultuous year of his life, when his whole world had collapsed, crashing down on him like a pack of cards. The way that Paul looked at it
Procrastination could be a helpful tool when you really wanted a reprieve, an escape if you like, or your attention to be skillfully diverted, dragged away from the horrifying thoughts that had haunted his darkest nightmares in recent weeks and months. When Paul looked at himself in the mirror, he wasn't pleased with what he saw staring back at him. The fullness of his cheeks that had given him that cute baby face had lost its buoyancy with all his recent weight loss. Even his chino pants were almost hanging off him. It was the belt around his waistband that helped to keep everything up. All that had unrolled over the past year, like a scroll to a screenplay, had much more in common with a gruesome graphic scene from a Stephen King novel than any bearing with our reality. He shut his eyes tightly, as if to will away the ominous impressions of that dreadful, despicable, fateful day that he'd been enlightened about all those months ago, when he'd first heard the sobering news. It had been so astounding that for him he had wondered if it could possibly be true. He had been assured by the estate's attorneys that it most certainly was. Even though the details of the inauspicious macabre events had been clandestinely, rather artfully covered up by an agenda-driven press. For Paul, merely thinking about what had occurred on his uncle's Ohio farm, it was impossible to fathom that something so outlandish could happen to such convivial, fun-loving people. Paul chose to wilfully abandon the obtrusive, rude visions that impregnated his mind with a fierce insistence. There was plenty of time to think about all that stuff later, but not now, not while he was here by the ocean. The sun was barely a hint in the distance on this breezy, cool morning, a ribbon of tangerine, laced cloud that was sandwiched between midnight blue and an expansive dark sky. Much like his late mother, who had been an early bird when she was alive, he followed her example and had risen early out of his hotel bed, long before the waves of people descended on the beaches in their droves, with picnic baskets, umbrellas, beach towels, coolers, books, sunglasses, suntan lotion, and hats. Paul liked the empty quietness of the beach, and being alone to embrace the dawn of a brand new morning, when the earth herself arose from a deep slumber, with a measure of reluctance, as she too would appreciate more rest. Paul is soothed by the reassuring continuous lapping ebb of the ocean, as the waves rolled forward, sweeping magnanimously towards the sea sand, plundering their undulating edges with lacy curls of pretty white foam, then skipping backwards into the ocean and forwards again, in a yo-yo motion, like an ebullient child playing hopscotch. Paul closes his eyes again tightly, trying to empty his mind of all thoughts, as if he's decluttering the accumulated papers on a desk in the office he wants to throw out. Only decluttering his mind was way harder than this. For weeks now his peaceful slumber has been hostilely disturbed, unfairly robbed of any tranquillity, and most nights he's laid in bed tossing and turning, in the pooling turmoil of his own inflamed sweat. Paul craved peace, like a woman on a diet might salivate and yearn for a piece of sinful, decadent and rather gooey chocolate cake. He wished with all his heart that the stress of recent months could be taken away, with the tide, rather like a hat being blown off a man's head, and cast out to sea, soon forgotten by its owner, who finally accepts its fate. Just for once he's going to allow himself to thoroughly enjoy the privilege of this peaceful solitude, the contentment of this blissfully refreshing morning, to wash over him like an ocean wave, with its fragrant saltiness, while a soft breeze jiggles the tendrils of blonde curls that lick against the back of his neck. Paul stands silently at the water's edge, with his chino pants rolled up above his knees, marvelling at the power of the ocean. Like many things in life, the ocean can greet you warmly, like a long-lost congenial friend, caressing and anointing your feet with her cool water. But rest assured, she is not adverse to taking away from you either. She can be mean, ruthless, unmerciful at times. Paul knows this only too well, as do all the boats and ships that have been shipwrecked in her water over hundreds of years. Over multiple generations, how many hundreds of people have surrendered to her wrath? But it is within the heart of her danger that a deep beauty can be found, like a precious, priceless jewel, or like an oyster pearl submerged among the debris of a rough, unremarkable encasement, or even a beautiful rose with jagged thorns that can so easily pierce your skin, but at the same time offer you the pleasure of her arresting beauty. It is a burst of icy cold water that baptizes his feet, that bounces Paul out of his revelry. Seconds later he notices a beautiful gleaming shell, twinkling from beneath the ocean water. He eagerly reaches down to grab the shell and to examine it. He looks up with a start as he hears a voice next to him. It's a young woman who's looking at Paul's shell with an envious admiration and wondrous awe. "That's a beauty," she says, stepping forward in the surf and hovering over Paul to examine his shell. "Do you mind if I take a look at it?" she asks, studying Paul curiously. "It's such a beautiful colour." "Of course not," says Paul, always the gentleman, smiling at her as he hands the young woman the purple shell to inspect. She takes it from him eagerly to examine. Paul decides that this young woman looks remarkably familiar to him, but he can't place her at all. Where is she from? The young woman is possibly 32, the same age as he is, with long dark hair that caresses her upper back and is as silky as a gleaming curtain, while her lapis lazuli eyes sparkle like the ocean in their animated enthusiasm, which is so infectious that Paul finds himself smiling back at her so broadly, so much so he's almost taken off guard. He's surprised by his smile, as he can't remember the last time he actually exercised his mouth like this. "I haven't seen one of these shells for such a long time," says a young girl. "I've been looking every day, you know, for the special ones, but most of the time they're just broken. I don't know why so many break. Perhaps it's the power of the ocean. One can never underestimate the strength of those waves out there." "You're right about that. If I know anything about the ocean, I would say that. Never underestimate her," says Paul. "Funny," says the girl, handing back Paul the shell. "Why is it people always call the ocean a her? It's never a him, is it?"
"Maybe because she's cantankerous, temperamental, rather moody. One minute she can be calm, the next choppy and tumultuous. Just like woman,"
Paul teases. "You're cheeky," says the girl, grinning. "I'll have you know, not all women are moody."
"I was only pulling your leg," says Paul. "You can have it," he says, handing the young woman the shell. "It's yours."
The young woman looks nonplussed. "Are you sure? It's a pretty purple shell, isn't it? It's known as a pansy shell. It resembles a pansy, that's why it's called that. Some believe they're coins from lost mermaids, or even the people of Atlantis. My mother told me that even Christian missionaries found symbolism in the 5-fold radial pattern and the dove-shaped internal structure of the shell."
"Really?" says Paul, raising a quizzical brow. "You certainly know your stuff about shells. I am impressed."
"Let's go and sit on the sand over there," says the young woman. Paul needs little encouragement, as talking to this unassuming young woman has cushioned the blow of his pain, put some of those meandering, nagging thoughts on the back burner, and Paul would easily welcome any kind of distraction. They both sit a foot apart from each other, side by side, staring out at the ocean. The woman rolls up her sweatpants and is digging her feet into the soil. "This is the best time to be up," she says. "I always like to come out here before it gets busy, so I can thoroughly enjoy the piece of the beach to myself. I never get tired of coming down here, watching the sunrise, listening to the crashing waves. Life can be tough, I find, but out here by the ocean, all your problems seem so minuscule and insignificant compared to her. Excuse me," she says, flushing pink. "Well, excuse me for jabbering on like this. I guess I'm in a meditational mood. That's what the ocean does to my mind. It calms it. If you don't mind my saying, I haven't seen you around here before, but you do look strangely familiar, but I can't place you. But I do feel as if I've met you before. But your face, it's your face. It's so familiar."
"Well, I used to live around here when I was a young boy. Left here when I was 16 years old, so I grew up here. I moved away to live with my uncle and aunt in Ohio."
The young woman furrows her brow. "What's your name?"
"I'm Paul James Johnson," says Paul, squinting his eyes at the woman, as the sun has suddenly risen, and its bright beams are glittering over the water.
"You were in my class at school."
I'm Nina. Don't you remember me? Nina Napier, the girl that wore those Coke bottle glasses that made my eyes look like an owl because they would reflect so much. Don't you remember I got teased mercilessly about it? The kids could be cruel, but boy, those were ugly glasses. I was forced to wear them, as I was blind as a bat without them. Paul grins. By golly, I do remember you. I think you were called Brown Owl by everyone at school. I could think of worse names to be called than being compared with an owl. But let's just say those bottle glasses were unfortunate. I mean, you've got really beautiful eyes, but back then no one could see them, until you stopped wearing them when you were about 13, I think it was. People were shocked when they finally saw how normal and how pretty your eyes were. Do you still wear glasses today?
Are you kidding me? I wear contacts, and that's never going to change. I promise you, if you've had to live in Coke bottle glasses like I did for so many years back then, you would never, ever be seen dead wearing glasses again. So no, I'm stuck with contacts now. Nina pauses for a moment and awkwardly sifts the sands in her hands. Were you not the one that lost your mother in that fortuitous accident? Wasn't she swept out to sea or something? I think I remember the story. It was most unfortunate. Paul nods. That's right. Nina reaches out to nudge Paul's arm. I'm so sorry. That must have been so dreadful for you. I can't imagine what you must have been through. At the time, everybody was so concerned about you. I mean, you were an only child with a single mother. I think you were 16 at the time. Is that why you went to live with your uncle in Ohio? I remember hearing something about that. It was a dreadful tragedy.
It happens, says Paul tightly, his voice failing to conceal its snappiness.
Why on earth did you come back here? I mean, after everything that happened with your mother, it must really evoke nostalgic, wistful, rather blissful memories, but at the same time, tragically sad ones.
I suppose you think I should hate the ocean, says Paul reflectively, but I don't. I love her. It's like appreciating the beauty of a rose that shredded your fingers to pieces with its jagged thorns. But you still admire the beauty of that rose. You still acknowledge it. So yes, despite her treachery, she is magnificent. I guess I came back here just to see her again. This place calms my soul. It's a sanctuary for me. I love Ocean City. And even though I haven't seen her for many years, she has become an indelible part of me, I'm afraid.
Me too, says Nina. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else in the entire world. Do you still live in Ohio?
No, I went to university in Utah. Lived there for many years afterwards. But I'm flying back to Ohio tomorrow to see the farm where I lived with my uncle and aunt. I haven't been back there for quite some while.
Well, I'm sure they'll be thrilled to see you again. They must miss you terribly.
Paul shrugs his shoulders. I possibly saw them for a weekend break 7 years ago. But no, I shan't be seeing them again. I wish I'd kept in better touch with them. But I was young, naive, full of my own aspirations. Selfish back then, really. Time went by so fast. And although I phoned them regularly, it was never the same. It is never the same when you just phone someone, is it? I just have so much regret, that's all. It's hard to forgive myself for my apathy. I was like a son to them. They didn't have any children of their own. I let them down so dreadfully. I'm so bitterly disappointed in myself for being so caught up in my own life that I almost forgot about them. Well, I didn't really. I never forgot about them. But they may think I forgot about them, and that's a problem for me.
Goodness gracious, you really are hard on yourself, aren't you? Don't beat yourself over the head about it. It's not something you can't easily rectify. I'm sure you can make amends when you see them again. It happens when people move away, you know. They mean to keep in touch, but all their good intentions fly by the wayside. I went to stay with a cousin of mine in Sweden. I promised to keep in touch with her. And then guess what? I failed abysmally. I admit it. At the time, I was heartily convinced we would stay connected forever. But life grabs hold of you, doesn't it? You get caught up in your own world.
You should get in touch with her again, says Paul. before you regret it, like I do.
Wait a minute, says Nina, looking at Paul with a furrowed brow. What do you mean by what you said earlier? You shan't be seeing them again. Your aunt and uncle, they're not. They're both dead, says Nina, looking agog. Both of them dead? That is so dreadful. She stammers for a brief moment, as if not knowing exactly what to say. First losing your mother like that, and now this? This is insanely cruel. It's not fair. Paul nods.
They're dead, all right.
But what happened? Was it an accident of some kind? If they both died together? Paul pauses for a moment.
You really want to know, do you?
Nina nods. Of course I want to know.
Well, my aunt and uncle were found in the Woodgrove on their property. They'd been brutally murdered, their heads torn off their necks, their body parts splattered all over the trees. There you are. You want to hear that?
Nina stares at Paul in abject horror. Are you kidding me? It sounds like something out of a gruesome movie. Do the police know who murdered them?
Haven't got a clue. Not a chance of finding out either. They're all bloody useless, the whole lot of them, says Paul. My uncle and aunt had no enemies, so there's no one suspicious.
Well, they must have had one enemy at least, said Nina. If you ask me, decapitating someone's head is definitely a sign of intense hatred. Who could do such a macabre, vindictive thing? They had to have hated your aunt and uncle. It's bad enough to blow someone's head off with a sawn-off shotgun, but killing your relatives like this speaks of revenge, hatred, spite, jealousy, all the emotions I can think of.
It's very bizarre. Of course, the details of the case have been masterfully covered up. They don't want the gruesome death to get out there, as the manner in which they both died could cause undue upset. But someone must know something, says Paul reflectively.
That doesn't surprise me at all. You can't trust the press. I learnt that a long time ago. They always have an agenda. There was someone recently bitten by a shark, lost an arm and a leg. They never reported it. They thought it might affect tourism. Why are you going back to that farmhouse, given what happened?
Because my aunt and uncle left everything in their will to me, says Paul. They never had kids of their own, so I became like a son to them. They want their ashes sprinkled on the farm, so I've got to oblige their last wishes. I also need to put the farm on the market and do some investigation on my own, as the police clearly aren't doing their job properly. I want to find out what really happened, and who out there hates my aunt and uncle so much they would willfully murder them so brutally. The coroner told me on the telephone she'd never seen anything like it before. She said it looked like their heads had been torn off their necks and their eyes and tongues had been removed. I think it's a symbolic thing to remove eyes and a tongue. It's almost like a cryptic message. The tongue represents shutting someone up. The removal of the eyes is like stopping them from seeing. I can't help wondering if my aunt and uncle were being blackmailed in some way. But by what and by who, I can't imagine.
It sounds utterly appalling if you ask me. Are you going back to that Ohio farm all on your own? Asks Nina, looking troubled. I know if it were up to me, I wouldn't advise you going on your own. Have you not got a wife with someone who can go with you? A friend, perhaps, or a cousin?
Not married, said Paul. Dodged that bullet with my ex-fiancée. Caught her cheating on me with my best friend. The two of them are now engaged. I've been invited to the wedding. Some people don't have any scruples, do they? They think I'd actually go to that wedding after they stabbed me so viciously in the back like that. I don't want to see the two of them ever again as long as I live. I've been thinking of leaving Utah for that very reason. I don't want to bump into them on the street, do I?
Bloody hell, that's tough. You seem to have been through the mince grinder since you were 16 years old. You've had life rough over the last few years. It hasn't exactly been fair on you, says Nina. Do you know, I know people who've never had a bad thing happen to them a day in their lives. It makes me sick. It's like they were born in the clover. It's like when God was handing out the candies, he gave some people a whopping cartload and others a scant few.
I think you're wrong, Nina. It may look like that on the surface, but sometimes when we observe other people from our own perspective, it looks like they have it easy. But we don't really know what's going on in their lives or in their heads. People have their own daily struggles, and they do a jolly good job of hiding it from the world. Before I told you my story today, you might have seen me as a man on the beach enjoying a beautiful morning. I might smile at you in passing, but you don't know by glancing at me how troubled my life is, do you?
That's exactly what my dad is always saying. He thinks a lot of people have it very hard. He believes life is not easy, on any of us, without any exceptions. He thinks humans are good at hiding their emotions. Look, I know this might be very presumptuous of me, but if you need a friend, I would love to come with you to Ohio. It's only an hour and a half's flight from here, and even by car it's probably just 8 hours. I was intending on taking a break for a while anyway. There's no time like the present. I wouldn't mind coming with you. I think you could do with a friend. You seem rather sad.
Paul looked astonished. You do that for me? And you barely know me?
Correction, we do know each other. Very well, actually. We were at school together for many years, you may remember. Well, we aren't exactly strangers. We were at school together for about 16 years. And as a friend, of course I'll come with you. I fancy myself as a bit of a Nancy Drew. I could help you do some investigation if you like. I'm curious to find out exactly what happened to your uncle and aunt, like you are. I could help you ask around town, speak to their friends, find out if anyone had a grudge against them. Someone has to know something. Paul's account. It was certainly the best decision I'd ever made, stopping over at Ocean City in Maryland for a quick diversion from going straight to Ohio. It had been years since I'd been back to my hometown, and walking along the boardwalk, with its cute little boutiques, cafes, restaurants and ice cream shops, while eating ice cream from a cone, looking at the Ferris wheel on the pier, with a plethora of games and rides on offer, clearly designed to invite an excited adrenal response, running along the beach, dipping my feet in the cool ocean, and of course meeting Nina, were certainly the best things that could have happened to me. It was about time that fate smiled upon me, with a little promise, as life had recently been tortuously hard. Sometimes I had to drag myself out of bed, because I was so downtrodden by a hopeless sense of despair. Unbeknown to Nina, she'd actually been my crush since I was 13 years old, when I'd been at school, and she stopped wearing those god-awful bottle-top glasses that magnified her eyes to the size of an owl's. I'll never forget the first time I saw her without her glasses. I was in for a shock. It had been love at first sight. It was like discovering that among your peers you had quite by chance stumbled across a diamond in the rough. I had thought about her for many long years, even assumed she was married by now, as girls like her don't remain on the shelf for very long. And now with those glasses off her face, the men would be breaking down the barricades to date her. What were the odds of bumping into Nina so fortuitously after about 15 years? It had been a marvellous, auspicious gift from God, seeing Nina again. It hadn't felt like a brief interaction with a stranger either. I felt as if I'd known Nina all my life, even though when I decided I fancied her at 13, I deliberately distanced myself from her, due to my crippling, rather evasive shyness, and a dreadful fear that she would discover that I liked her. I was certain it was written all over my face, as clear as a blazing red traffic light, so I'd always just shrunk in the shadows, ashamed and guilty of the love I felt for her. My life had come crumbling down on me in Utah, in a spate of only a few months, rather like a fabulous 4-layered wedding cake that looked so perfect on the outside, and with one tiny push comes tumbling over, crashing to the ground, and all that is left is a sticky, gooey, grubby, unsightly and crumbly mess that was indicative of my life. By all accounts, my very best friend Rufus thought it was worth ruining our long-standing solid friendship by cheating with my fiancé, so that was a great big stab in the back for me. Then if that was not harrowing enough for me to have to process, it was days after that obnoxious, repellent hurt that the universe dealt me another noxious, unpalatable blow by serving me a rancidly bitter helping of sorrow by the gallon load, when I heard the lamentable crushing news about the manner in which my aunt and uncle had met such a lugubrious end. They were the nearest things in my life to parents.
after my mother's inadvertent death. Was it not bad enough that they had died in the first place? But the spine-chilling, abominable, callous way in which they had been killed meant that the pain of their loss was insufferable to me. Someone depraved, warped, nefariously diabolical had chosen to kill them in the kind of gruesome, contemptible way that was more suitable for a work of fiction than with our reality. So there I was in my truck, driving Nina to my aunt and uncle's Ohio soybean farm, where I had let the land out to another farmer to harvest the crop there, as it would not have pleased my uncle to leave that valuable land unattended. Here in Ohio, soybeans is the #1 crop in the state. My heart is fluttering as I drive down the long familiar vertical ribbon of road, representative of the northern Great Plains, full of rich fertile land, ideal for farming, while the areas around Lake Erie have sandy clay beaches, tall clay bluffs, and dunes that run along the shoreland, dramatically different to where my aunt and uncle live. Even though I've not been here for at least 7 years, my heart continues to do flip-flops. Even my knuckles are tightening on the steering wheel. If I didn't know any better, I would actually say I was beginning to have a panic attack. "Are you all right, Paul?" Nina asks me. "I'm so glad I came along with you. You're looking so jittery." "I'm glad you came along too, I admit. I don't think I could have done this alone." The land stretched out before us on either side of the road, reaching out from here to eternity. Farmland that had been tilled and ploughed, filled with corn and hay, fields dotted with black and white dairy cows. Occasionally we see American quarter horses frolicking in fields. I then take a swift right at the fork in the road. My stomach begins to churn, lurching violently. I feel as if I'm going to hurl, but I fight back the bitter taste clawing at the back of my throat. I've got to keep it together. I really have got to keep it together. The last thing I want is for this lovely girl Nina, who graciously agreed to accompany me on this trip, to think I'm a complete head case. I draw in a deep breath, climbing out of my truck to open the familiar cattle gate. We drive through the viridescent splendour of the glorious countryside, with its neat vertical tracks of pristine soybean crops, basking lazily under the blue firmament, drinking in the sweet rays of the sun like a hummingbird guzzling up nectar. The blue sky seems all-consuming. It hovers above the flat expanse of green, but cluttered under the horizon are the vertical silhouettes of the oak and hickory forests that fringe heavily the right-hand perimeter of my uncle's farm from beyond his farmhouse. I can observe the familiar silhouettes of the storage barns, the outhouses, and of course the white gleaming symmetrical silhouettes of my uncle and aunt's arresting farmhouse, with 2 stories of large French windows and an attractive Wedgwood blue front door. I've lived there since I was 16 years old. The road is rough and unaccommodating as I navigate the rental Nissan truck over the rugged appendages of loose rocks and pebbles. Finally, I've parked the car under the open canopy of the carport as me and Nina walk to the front door. "Are you sure you're all right?" she asks me again. "I'm fine," I say. "Don't you worry about me." I fumble around under the plant pot to retrieve the key, which has been placed there by the solicitor dealing with the will. My fingers shake in my hands as I plunge the key into the lock. I push open the door very slowly. It squeaks in violent protest, as if crying out in agony, in need of its urgent oiling. I'm surprised how muggy, how claustrophobic and close the air is in the house. There's a distinct musty smell, a smell of damp, a smell of mildew. I immediately rush over to the drawn curtains, pulling them back hastily, throwing open sliding doors and windows everywhere. A fresh breeze whisks through the house, holding the mugginess hostage, anointing the air with a fresher feeling. The house forthrightly betrays its year of neglect, as the wooden furniture is now caked in thin slivers of fine dust. Someone has written in the dust above a dresser, "John was here," whoever John is. I notice spiders have spun their silvery webs over doorways and on the corners of walls. The velvety rich carpets and oakwood floors are littered with mouse droppings, cockroach carcasses, and there's a huge hole in one of the sofas where a mouse has tenaciously burrowed her nest. Even if the house has been abandoned, there's been a great deal of activity going on in here, but not of the human kind. Everything is exactly the way my aunt and uncle left it, that ill-omened night, that their lives were taken from them so infeliciously. I notice my uncle's rifle cabinet is left wide open. There are bullets haphazardly strewn across the floor, in a higgledy-piggledy disarray. My uncle would never have left bullets lying everywhere like this, in such shambolic chaos, which gives me pause for thought. Did my uncle know his life was in danger that night? By the state of the bullets, it looks like he was caught off guard, and was in a tearing hurry. I am surprised the police have not taken more notice of this bizarre scene. For me, it speaks volumes. It suggests my aunt and uncle knew they were in danger. My uncle's rifles do appear to have been confiscated by them, but the bullets have been overlooked, discarded, and completely forgotten about. I notice a book open by the side of the upholstered chair. That was where my aunt used to sit and knit, or read. It looks like some kind of a gripping detective novel. That would have been typical for her. She loved detective mysteries. There are 2 mugs lying on the coffee table, and remaining ashy embers of an old fire line the grate. Could they have been sitting by the fire, drinking hot chocolate together, heard a strange noise, went to investigate, and the perpetrator, whoever they were, killed them? The Woodgrove was 200 feet away from the rear of the house. Why did they end up being killed there? The next couple of days were spent visiting solicitors, picking up my uncle and aunt's ashes from the mortuary, cleaning up the dust in the house, bagging up my aunt and uncle's clothes to give to a local charity, going through the post, talking to the local farmer who was hiring out the fields of soya beans, and visiting people in the town who knew my aunt and uncle very well, calling in on old friends and so forth. Yet despite our very best efforts, it seemed no matter who Nina and I spoke to, no one was any more the wiser as to what had happened to my beloved family members. So this enigmatic mystery of the grotesque manner in which they died deepened and loomed over my heart like an oppressively dismaying dark shadow. I knew in my heart someone had to know something, but whoever they were clearly very reluctant to talk. "It's so frustrating," says Nina, as we sit in the coffee shop sipping lattes. "No one knows a damn thing. Some Nancy Drew I'd make. Everyone thinks that a murderous villain escaped from a mental asylum, murdered your relatives. No one thinks they had an enemy in the entire world. So I'm not sure where we're going with this, and if we're going to find any answers," she says, looking up at me with a deep concern etching the corners of her sparkling blue eyes. I was stunned how this woman whom I barely knew cared about me this much. Even my fiancé of over 4 years had never been this attentive. I grimaced. I just want justice for my aunt and uncle. But I knew Nina was absolutely right. It would seem I was going to have to resign myself to the fact that answers concerning my relative's demise would never ever be forthcoming, but would remain cloaked and shrouded in mystery, the reports somehow becoming dusty and estranged in some official state filing system. "Excuse me," says a young woman trotting up to our table reluctantly, with a nervous gait. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." I can see her fingers are twitching. She seems timorously shy, very reticent. "I heard you asking questions around town about Mr. and Mrs. Johnson's untimely demise. I might know something," she says awkwardly, "but I can't be certain. It could, of course, be absolutely nothing." "Please sit down," says Nina. "Can we offer you a drink?" "If you're offering, a Mountain Dew would be rather nice. I'm actually quite parched." Nina indicates to the waitress to order the Mountain Dew for the young lady, while I stare at the woman. "So how do you know my aunt and uncle, do you mind me asking you?" "Well, they contacted me for help around their home. Mrs. Johnson was having problems with her arthritis. She needed someone to give her a helping hand around the place with general household duties. So I offered my services, did a little cleaning for her 3 times a week. She was a lovely woman, so very kind to me. I'm dreadfully sorry for your loss. It was a dreadful tragedy." "Did my aunt and uncle ever mention anything to you about a person who might have been giving them a lot of grief?" "You mean, did they have any enemies?" "Goodness gracious, no. Who would ever want to harm them? Your aunt and uncle were the loveliest people. No one would willingly hurt them. They were an asset to the community." "So then what do you propose to know?" The young woman looks cautiously and nervously around the cafe to ensure there are no eavesdropping ears around.
but she's reasonably satisfied by the customary clatter and clink of plates and glasses, and the background humming sound of people absorbed in their own conversations. Well, a couple of nights before they died, when I arrived at work that morning, Mrs. Johnson was in a dreadful state. She was shaking like a leaf, saying, "What are we going to do, Alfie? What are we going to do? Next time he could kill us."
Not if I get to him first, sweetheart. You mark my words, sweetheart. I won't rest until I've showered him with bullets and buried him in the front yard myself.
At this, I am so shocked. I say,
"Oh, my God! They did have an enemy. Who is he? What is his name?"
I can feel my heart flouncing with excitement. This woman knows something. I can feel it in my bones. "Before you get excited," said the girl, giving the waitress a thankful nod as she places the ice-cold glass of Mountain Dew in front of her and takes a few sips from her straw.
"Start from the very beginning," I tell the young lady, whose name is Claudia. "I want you to describe everything that happened that day, so that I can be there in my mind's eye and see everything through the lens of your eyes. I want details, lots of details. If the coffee was cold, I want to know about it. If there was no loo paper in the toilet, I want to know about it. Tell me everything."
"Very well," she says. "I will." Claudia's account. I've never believed in a sixth sense, but the day I drew up to the Johnson farmhouse, something felt off. I noticed all the curtains in the house were drawn closed. That was exceedingly unusual. It was 8:30 in the morning, for goodness sake. A crisp, beautiful autumn day, with a biting chill in the air, highlighting that winter was hastening her approach. For the first time in ages I was wearing a long-sleeved sweater, so the cold was laying down her early foundations for the coming season. At this time of the morning I would have expected the front door to be open, slightly ajar at least, the curtains to be drawn back wide, a few windows open to invite in some fresh air and some early morning sunshine. I would also expect to hear laughter, voices, see Mr. Johnson messing around in the outhouse, and Mrs. Johnson feeding the chickens. But there was none of that. The whole farmhouse was steeped in an airy, almost ghostly silence that actually made my skin crawl. I knew something felt wrong. Something was off. As I approached the door, I noticed this huge footprint in the flower bed that has been badly trampled, and it's outside one of the windows. It's massive. It's far too big to be human. I remember audibly gasping, studying it for a moment, while thinking, what the hell? When I got to the door before I could even knock, Mrs. Johnson opens it abruptly. She was still wearing her pyjamas, with a robe tied around her middle. She pushes me into the house, bobbing her head outside the door, to the left and right, as if she's terribly afraid of something or someone, something treacherous loitering around in the background. Then she quickly double bolts it behind me, once I'm inside. I remember thinking maybe Mrs. Johnson is becoming slightly senile. Her behaviour was completely absurd. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Johnson?" I say. And that's when I see Mr. Johnson sitting on the high chair against the granite kitchen countertop, just staring vacantly into space. He's holding his hands onto a coffee mug so tightly that I can actually see the whites of his knuckles, betraying the tense anxiety he's obviously feeling. I notice all the colour has drained from his face. He's as white as a sheet. Then it hits me, someone they love must have died. They're in mourning. That's what this is all about. I remember they talked about Paul James Johnson. Maybe something had happened to him. "Has something happened to your nephew?" I ask. Mrs. Johnson looks up at me with a nonplussed expression and says, "Of course not. Paul's absolutely fine. Why do you ask?" "Mrs. Johnson," I say, "if you forgive me for saying so, I know something is going on. You're not usually in your pyjamas and dressing gown at this time, trembling with terror, bolting the door behind me the moment I enter, and acting super weird. What the heck is going on?" That's when Mrs. Johnson breaks down in tears. She's sobbing while Mr. Johnson is telling his wife to get a grip. Everything's going to be all right. He's going to sort it all out. "But he's nasty and vindictive. He'll kill you," she spouts indignantly. "You don't stand a chance against him." Mr. Johnson looks irritated.
"Have a little faith, will you, sweetheart? I told you I will take care of everything. Just you wait. By tomorrow night I will have buried him in the front yard. I will be showering him with bullets.
But you can't do that. You can't do that. He'll kill you.
Calm down, sweetheart. I've got everything sorted, everything under control. There is nothing for you to worry your pretty head about.
As you can imagine, Mr. Johnson talking about burying a man under his front yard really did get my attention. What the hell were they going on about? The energy in the house was palpable. You could actually smell the fear. The couple didn't want to leave the confines of their farmhouse and were intent on leaving all the curtains drawn. They even asked me to take a trip to the grocery store on their behalf to pick up some food. I overhear Mr. Johnson telling his wife,
"Don't you dare tell Claudia about any of this. No one must know. We don't want it getting around town. People will think we've lost our marbles."
"But couldn't we call the police? Or Fish or Game?" Mrs. Johnson protests. "Surely someone can help us."
"Sweetheart, if I don't want the folk in town knowing about this, I certainly don't want the police or Fish and Game knowing about this either. If they mess this up, God only knows what will become of us. If they got that thing upset, he could tear down our entire house. Besides, there is a very strong possibility they won't believe a single word we say. Either way, we cannot win this one. Keep your mouth tightly shut. The less people know about this, the better. I need to sort this problem out myself. Do you understand?"
I'm very glad to say when finally Mr. Johnson did leave his farmhouse, albeit with a bit of reluctance to attend to some farming duties, I begged Mrs. Johnson to tell me what was going on, and swore to her to keep everything she told me a clandestine secret. I think she knew she could trust me, so she told me everything. She told me that the previous night they'd been sitting together by a cosy fire. Their very large dog had died a week prior, 6 months after their Jack Russell Terrier. The couple were exceedingly aggrieved. They were spending time just chatting by the fireside, talking about the possibility of bringing new life into the farmhouse. Mrs. Johnson was against getting another pet. She claimed it would break her heart all over again. But her husband was trying to persuade her that without dogs around the place, it felt very empty. I think he described the place as becoming sombre, like a mortuary. That was when they heard this foreboding banging sound, and Mr. Johnson looks out of the window. He tells his wife there's something on the property, an intruder. He'd seen a dark, shadowy figure. He ambled over to his gun cabinet, grabbed a rifle, loaded it as quickly as he could, shooting out into the darkness, towards the direction of the intruder. In a trice he encounters the obscure, pretentious figure. It emerges through the dusky twilight, glaring at him with fiery red eyes. The creature looks like a cardboard cutout of King Kong, but with the outside light, the puddles of silvery moonlight dappling the yard, in a soft gossamer illumination, he observes that this thing is a Bigfoot. Mr. Johnson did not believe Bigfoots existed in North America, so seeing this thing was like being flung out of your paradigm. He said the creature must have been 9 foot tall without exaggeration, with the burliest, most heavy-set body he'd ever seen. He said the Bigfoot growled at him, screamed, pounded his chest violently, and ran towards Mr. Johnson. He said he believed shooting after the creature had made him incandescent with rage. He managed to bolt back into the house in the nick of time, but this creature started kicking at the eaves of the house, screaming indignantly, growling, and peering in at them through the window. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson were so terrified, they both clutched rifles in their hands all night, terrified that the creature would break in and kill them both. But once the sun set over the valley, the creature retreated into the Woodgrove and was gone. But what hadn't gone was their terror. The following night the creature never returned, so they were hoping against hope it was a once-off event. But I think it was that Bigfoot that must have killed them.
"Did you tell the police about this?"
I ask. I tried. Believe me, I did. But the moment I said the word Bigfoot, they laughed in my face. They thought it was so funny. So I clammed up after that. But I know it was that creature that killed them.
"I think you may be absolutely right, Claudia. Thank you very much for telling us this. We greatly appreciate your help."
As you can imagine, after hearing Claudia's account, I was now certain that both my aunt and uncle had been killed by a violent Bigfoot. I think the creature possibly came back to surprise them both another night. My uncle possibly went out to try and shoot him, possibly followed by my aunt, who was terrified of my uncle coming to any harm.
but both of them clearly aggrieved the Bigfoot, who lunged out at them in anger and had literally torn their bodies wide apart, displaying them around the forest like some kind of gruesome, morbid trophy. I was now absolutely certain that there may be a Bigfoot on my uncle's property, who had killed the both of them. I was determined to wreak my revenge. I had to find him. So with my hunting rifle in hand, I was determined to search the Woodgrove for him. I was going to kill him with a high-powered rifle. And that was that. "Remember when we first met," said Nina, "you'd say to me that we should never underestimate the power of the ocean. Cannot the same be said for this Bigfoot? If your aunt and uncle went after him with their rifles, and he overcame them so easily, will he not do the very same to you?" "There's a difference," I say to Nina. "The element of surprise is always an advantage. A whole year has gone by since that tragic event, so that Bigfoot will not be expecting any reprisals." "You're crazy, you know that. How are you ever going to find him? How can you even be sure he's even in the Woodgrove anymore? Do you know how many people spend a lifetime looking for Bigfoots and never ever find them? What makes you think you're so special that you're just going to stumble across him like that?" "It's not that I think I'm special. It's because I'm determined. There's a very big difference." It was during the day I decided to investigate the Woodgrove, leaving Nina behind at the farmhouse. But much to my extreme annoyance, I discovered she'd followed me, and I was less than pleased about that. "Why did you follow me? I told you to stay back. It's not safe for you to come in here." "Because I'm not going to let you wander around in here on your own. Look, I've brought your other rifle along with me. I know how to use it. I'm a great shot. My grandfather taught me when I was younger." "Well, you are here now, so you might as well come along for the ride." The Woodgrove was so beautiful. It was hard to believe that my aunt and uncle had met their deadly fate in such a transfixing place, where their bodies had been found by a local farmhand who had subsequently called the police. I was reminded of the beauty of the ocean, how so many had become victims to her wrath. With beauty, there was so often a catch. The flower on a cactus, the poison on a spectacular tree frog, the thorn on a rose. It was autumn. This oak hickory forest was ablaze with golden leaves, some still hanging on the branches of trees, while others fallen cascaded across the long path in carpets of gleaming gold. The mature oak and hickory trees I knew had well outlived many of our kind, mature, proud, their heady boughs jutted out of the earth with an audacious resolve, with a dignified splendour, their towering girths gracefully caressing the skies, with leafy heads ablaze with golden confetti. As we walk along the meandering earthen trail, we kick up leaves with our feet. The soft wind whips up loose batches of recently fallen ground litter. It also beats gently against the twitching boughs of the trees. The sun is blocked out of the canopy above our heads, as these oak trees steal the light with a gluttonous, ravenous appetite. But sneaking prisms of light mischievously creep through the scant open spaces of the branches, like water trickling through a cracked mug. The forest floor is elegantly dappled in a gentle, ethereal luminescence, while the viridescent splendour of its ample furnishings from the shrubs and ferns is bewitching to behold. The sound of birdsong rises and falls in the forest, as birds on the forest canopy sing their tuneful chorus, infusing the air with the sweet fragrant perfume of their song. Me and Nina walk through the forest. She reaches out for my hand. My heart almost skips a beat. It gallops like an overexcited stallion that cannot be calmed. This I had not anticipated. The girl I'd dreamt of since I was 13 years old, holding my hand like this. I can't wipe the grin off my face. The mission we're on, to find this angry Bigfoot, seems to have taken a back seat for a moment, as I bask in the magic of this experience. "Don't look so surprised," Nina says to me. "I've liked you since we were 13 years old, and back then I think you liked me too. I always got a sense you did. Did you really think I came all this way out here with you, out of the goodness of my sweetheart? I wish I was that nice, but in truth I'm not. I came because I like you a lot. I always have. And when you left Ocean City all those years ago, I was absolutely gutted. I never thought I'd ever see you again, until I saw you on the beach. I used to curse myself for not having the guts to speak to you when I was 13.
I wasn't going to make the same mistake again. Believe me, I wasn't.
Did you recognize me on the beach that morning? I asked.
No, not until you looked me in the eyes when you handed me that pansy shell. Then I knew it was you, which is why I dragged you away to talk. I wasn't going to let you go, not now that I'd found you. I know I'm forward holding your hand like this, but I figured if I didn't make the first move, I might be waiting forever. That fiancé of yours really messed with your self-esteem, which is crazy. You're hot stuff. But the nicest thing about you is you don't know it. I think it's one of the most attractive things about you, your humility.
I laugh. I'm glad someone thinks I'm hot stuff. Methinks your contact lenses are as bad as your Coke bottle glasses you had back then. You must be as blind as a bat. But I'm very delighted you're blind.
I'll have you know my eyesight is very good. All of a sudden we stop talking. I'm not sure why. My animated mood flies from me, like a raven on a picket fence, taking flight. I sense something, but I'm not sure what it is. I'm not certain what I'm perceiving, but even my squirming gut is announcing to my circumspect instincts that something is definitely up, to pay heedful attention to whatever it is. So like a prudent watchdog, in a guarded position, I stand up alert, with my ears almost cocked forward, my heart thundering violently in my chest, so hard that even I am intimidated by its tempestuous vibrations. Everything looks misleadingly benign and benevolent in this forest. Even the swishing trees that move their boughs against the gentle wind appear congenial, non-threatening, tranquil in their repose. Yet I know in every part of my being, like a bold red warning sign planted on my subconscious mind, something is not right. My thoughts race like a herd of galloping bison to Claudia's compelling stories of a predatory Bigfoot that very likely had killed my aunt and uncle, splattering their remains over this Woodgrove like a macabre display at a Halloween gallery. Could he be here right now? Could he be watching us? In that moment, a fear transcends down my spine like an icy cold current of water, while the hairs on the back of my neck are standing on end. And if that's not bad enough, my heart is thundering so hard, so fast, I'm sure my chest is going to explode under its pressure. I came here to find this Bigfoot. I came here to kill him with my Remington high-caliber rifle that I'm now carrying in my American carrier. But now this brave, courageous idea of mine that seemed so plausible, so attainable in the cold light of day, seems preposterously ludicrous now. Do I really fancy myself as some kind of hero, taking on the kind of beast Claudia was describing to me at the coffee shop? I glance over at Nina. I can see the colour has drained from her face. She looks terribly afraid. She's trying to reach for her rifle, in her American carrier, but her fingers are trembling violently. Mine are doing no better. It's like they've literally turned to jello. Something's watching us. I feel as if we're being stalked. I heard heavy footprints behind us. I think we should get out of here.
Don't you worry, Nina. We're getting out of here right now, I say. Let's turn around, retreat on our footsteps.
The forest has gone quiet. I sense we're being watched. Is this heinously evil, truculent Bigfoot here, loitering among the ground cover, among the ferns, the shrubs, the briars, the trees themselves? Is he watching us? I shiver with apprehension at the very thought, my confidence shrinking back to the courage of a boy. And now, the courage of an ant. I feel eyes on us. The eyes seem to be drilling through me like a woodpecker's tenacious beak. But as I glance around my familiar surroundings, I see absolutely nothing. I feel frustrated. I cannot see a predator that can see me, which places me and Nina at an extreme disadvantage, in an unenviable, vulnerable position. One thing I've discerned is that the birdsong has all but drifted away, while the forest beyond the rustling leaves has become disturbingly quiet. And within that silence, every single part of me, every cell in my body is screaming so loudly to get out of this inauspicious, bodeful place. What the hell was I thinking coming in here? All of a sudden we hear movement behind the trees, and a head pops out at us. A friendly, congenial, pyramid-shaped head. with bright, sparkling, amused treacle-colour eyes that are both kind, benevolent, non-threatening and unintimidating. The eyes appear to look at us from 8 feet off the ground, which means the creature is incredibly tall. It shrinks back, retreating into the shadows. But Nina and I saw it. It was a Bigfoot. I know it was. We both know it was. What do you do when your enemy seems to have become a friend to you? When the creature you intended to kill appears convivial towards you, if not rather evasive? I wanted to lift up my rifle to fire at this Bigfoot impulsively, but the idiosyncratic creature is still cowering behind the trees, as if consumed by an evasive shyness, a timorous reticence. But despite that, I sensed it was reaching out to us with the arm of friendliness. How can I then turn on aggression towards it? "Don't shoot," whispers Nina, nudging my arm. "That may be a Bigfoot, but there is no way that was the Bigfoot that harmed your uncle and aunt. The creature, did you not see? It had the eyes of an angel. Did you see the eyes? I've never seen eyes like that. I know we saw the head fleetingly, but I saw enough to know that creature, it was no threat. I am torn between a rock and a hard place, not knowing how to react. But I had seen those eyes too, for a fleeting second, and those were not the eyes of an aggressive killer. They were the eyes of an angel. Nina was right about that. But that is of no comfort or consolation to me, although the fear I was feeling moments before has been calmed somewhat. The inauspicious feeling of dread vanquished from my mind. I came to this forest to wreak my revenge on a Bigfoot that had killed my aunt and uncle. But if the species are not all predatory killers, and there are more of these creatures around, how will I distinguish the perpetrator from the innocent? It would be like looking among a wheat crop for a single weed. Not easy. I can't just randomly shoot at anything that I might suspect could be guilty. What if they're not? Judging by the Bigfoot we had briefly observed, not all the apples in the barrel are actually rotten. We slowly moved through the forest, both feeling a lot less flustered, as the Bigfoot we'd just glimpsed was obviously benign, seemed convivial, timorous, but definitely did not impose a threat to us. In a trice, we're suddenly hit by a barrage of tiny pebbles. We turn around to see a female Bigfoot standing yards away from us. I know it was the one peeking at us behind the tree that we'd seen moments before. But now we see her in her lofty majesty and are thrown off guard by her mighty presence that could easily surrender a shocked heart to its final beat. I sense she's reaching out to us. She's beckoning to us. She's shy, but she seems to have overcome her angst and is insisting we follow her. "She wants us to follow her," says Nina. "I think we should. She's got kind eyes. We can definitely trust her." I study the Bigfoot. In normal circumstances, this creature would make me have a coronary arrest based on her mere size, her intimidating sinewy proportions. I imagine for her, lifting a car would be a piece of cake. That is how puissantly powerful she clearly is. I mean, I've never been good on size and weight, but I will tell you this, she's between 7 to 8 foot tall, densely ripped, with heavy-duty muscles, built like a powerful piece of farming machinery, strappingly robust. It would not be easy to take her down. You need the kind of powerful ammunition required for a rhino or an elephant. I notice she's covered in tortoiseshell colouring, and her hair is long and silky, her face human. It's so uncanny, although her head is a rather unusual cone shape, low slung on a Herculean-sized pair of shoulders. Her breasts are small and delicate on her stocky physique, and the only part of her body where the flesh is actually soft. I should be afraid of her, but I'm not. It's those bewitching, alluring eyes. It's her demure, gentle energy that reminds me more of a timorous doe, rather than a creature of such vast, substantial size. I've seen little snappy dogs more frightening than her. Nina was right. If I took a pop shot at her with my rifle, based on her serene, loving energy, how could I ever live with myself? As insane as this may sound, I'd feel as if I'd murdered a fellow human being, as that is how human she appears. She is clearly emotionally intelligent, dignified, very sharp-witted, but she's got a great sense of humour. If a creature has a profound sense of humour, then they're terribly clever. Let's not kid about that. Me and Nina do not feel afraid to follow her. She seems so eager to show us something. But what? I hasten to say, I entered this woodgrove with such a remarkable, hateful prejudice towards Bigfoots, after hearing Claudia's horrifying story. But this Bigfoot has turned my heart to mush. There is something so beguiling, so charmingly sweet about her. It's the way she turns around to look back at us to check we're following her. She makes a thrilled whooping sound at the back of her throat when she sees that we are, that makes Nina actually giggle. "She's so cute," whispered Nina to me. "I never thought I'd describe something her size as cute, but she's adorable. I want to go up to her and give her a huge hug, like a big oversized teddy bear." Me and Nina are now following the creature confidently. We know we're safe. We don't feel even a wee bit of fear. The creature is charming. Finally in the woods we come to a large clearing. The female Bigfoot is pointing to what looks like a large burial plot. There's a massive mound of soil pulled up above the ground, with a couple of sticks sticking through the soil. The Bigfoot is chattering away to us in an audible language that we don't understand or comprehend, but gestures for us to sit on the earthen floor, which we do. The next thing, her hands are digging into the mound as fast as she can, pulling away the soil frantically, like a dog in your yard, eagerly digging up the bone he has buried. We watch in abject bemusement, and the creature tosses away the soil, working vigorously with her hands. "What is she doing?" Nina whispers to me. "What does she want to show us?" Our noses are hit with a vile stench, but then the Bigfoot makes a happy, delighted, triumphant whoop and comes up to us with what looks to be a massive, oversized ball. But she's pulling the soil away from this incongruous round thing in her hands. And then we realise it's a Bigfoot's head. Nina screams because it's the most macabre thing we've ever seen. The thing is not fully decomposed, as flesh and even hair still cling to the skull like a tight leather. The Bigfoot retreats to the open grave. It smells repugnant. She returns with a dozen used rusty bullets that had been fired from a high-caliber rifle, that she drops at our feet, that had obviously been pulled out of the Bigfoot's body and buried beside his head for some bizarre reason. These are my uncle's bullets, the same ones that I'd found randomly spilled all over the floor in the house that the police had not bothered to clear away. I'm thinking to myself, is this the Bigfoot that killed my aunt and uncle? And then I hear a voice entering my head. Yes, it's him. Me and Nina stare at each other in nonplussed bewilderment. Then I hear the words, "I'm glad he's dead. He was evil. We're all glad he's dead. He killed my baby." At this, the Bigfoot's face becomes very emotional and distressed. Her jaw tightens and clenches with a suppressed anger that is making itself heard in the silence. And then, for a brief moment, I truly think she's going to cry. I can tangibly feel her excruciating pain. But cry she does not. I can sense the pain of a mother who has lost her baby so needlessly to a brutal killer who had no compassion or heart. She is a mother delighting with us in the death of this ghastly predator, wanting us to share in the good pleasure of this revelation that she knows will bring us comfort too. Nina jumps up and throws herself into the female Bigfoot's arms, clinging to the long silken hair, which she dampens with her tears. Nina begins to sob so loudly that the back of her throat sounds almost strained. "I'm so sorry for you. How dreadful. I can't imagine what you went through. He killed your baby? But why would he kill your baby?" "For fun," came the voice in our heads. "For fun. He was sick in the head." The Bigfoot female is shaking her head grievously. Nina looks like a doll in the Bigfoot's arms, but the Bigfoot's face is so moved, as if Nina's kind gesture of love has touched her heart to the quick. She pats Nina's back affectionately, while Nina wipes away the tears from her face with the back of her long sleeves. We both heard this female Bigfoot talking to us telepathically, in our heads. That had never happened to me before, nor ever since. It's a distinctive, audible voice in your mind you physically hear, which you know is not a random thought. The voice is articulate, but it's female. In bewilderment to make sense of what the Bigfoot is telling us, she begins to mime everything that happened that inauspicious night, when my uncle and aunt were tragically killed.
It would appear that my uncle had chased after the Bigfoot, with my aunt trailing behind him. He had shot at the Bigfoot multiple times. It seemed that the bullets had no immediate effect. The Bigfoot succeeded in tearing my uncle and aunt apart, arranging their bodies around the Woodgrove, like a horrific scene from your worst nightmare. The female Bigfoot points to the bullets, and is explaining that the Bigfoot that had killed my aunt and uncle finally sat on a rock after the gruesome carnage, and began to plunder his own skin, to remove any of the offending bullets that had jammed their way into his body, of which there were many. It was as if he was pulling burrs off a sweater that had been incarcerated in a bunch of thorny briars. One by one he pulls out the bullets, some embedded deeper than others, as they had become an irritant to him. Finally oblivious to the consequence of his actions, he removes one of the bullets from the femoral artery in his leg, which was acting like a plug hole. But once the bullet is removed, the blood begins to gush and seep out of the puncture like a tsunami. He tries to plug the bullet back into place to block the gash. When he realizes the gravity of what he's done, it's too late. The gash is far too wide. It cannot be reblocked again. He fades. Death comes quickly and urgently to him, sparing little regard for him. The same lack of regard that he'd shown towards my uncle and aunt. We were so happy, came the voice in our heads. You must be happy too. He's gone. This place is safe for all of us now. We watched the Bigfoot bury the head of the deceased foe back into the ground, covering it up with soil. In this poignant moment, I feel humbled and honoured that she led us to this grave. This idiosyncratic creature, against all odds, had reached out to me, sensing my pain. She was well acquainted with my kind of pain. She could read it on my face and in my heart like a book, and the longing in me to wreak my revenge on the monster that had killed my beloved relatives. It would seem that despite her natural reticence and reserve, she overcame that to bring me the comfort I was seeking, so that we could both share in the joy of his passing. And we did. In that moment a deep bond was birthed between the three of us, a friendship borne about by a shared grief. And although we all knew we would possibly never ever see each other again, there was a love between us that could not be extinguished. And all these years later, that female Bigfoot pops into my head at random, as if to suddenly say, hello. And the same thing happens to Nina, at exactly the same time. There is no way that that is a coincidence. We believe this is the Bigfoot's way of WhatsApping us, with the power of telepathic communication. It's powerful stuff, believe me. And it's real. Needless to say, I did scatter my uncle and aunt's ashes in the Woodgrove, and even though it was a scene of great carnage, I had scattered my mother's ashes out to sea as well, where she'd met her precarious end. For you see, despite the horrors that can occur in these places, my aunt and uncle had loved that Woodgrove, just like my mother had adored the ocean, as within the beauty can be a great, great danger, but we cannot escape the beauty. These days me and Nina can be seen walking down the broad walk in Ocean City, hand in hand, with a pram that is holding our firstborn child, a little girl we chose to call Lily. Me and Nina have been happily married for several years. We consider our encounter with the Bigfoot completely life-changing. And I went into the woods to find evil, but I found a good, as good always overcomes evil. So there you are. That's my story. And let's get started with tonight's story. Cole Irwin is sitting at the table on the Royal Caribbean cruise liner in the large buffet dining area with his wife Tessa and their 8-year-old son Juno. The cruise liner is cruising through the Baltic states, from Sweden, Denmark, Estonia, Norway and Russia. This is the first time Cole and his wife have ever been on a cruise liner before. Let's not kid. They're very excited about this trip. The massive vessel is spectacular, with grandiose interiors swathed in luxurious patterned carpets, ornate glass lifts, fabulously elegant shops, and very extravagant cabins for many passengers. The cruise liner will be stopping at different countries along the way, so passengers on board the ship can disembark and enjoy excursions in uncharted areas of the map that they have longed to visit. Let's just say for Cole and his wife Tessa, the big bear of the Baltic states, Russia herself, has always harnessed within them a curious intrigue,
They are particularly looking forward to their visit to St. Petersburg and visiting the Elizabethan Baroque palace known as Winter Palace that served as the official residence for the Russian Emperor in 1732. Cole's plate is piled high with scrambled eggs, salmon and cream cheese, and he's likely to go back for more. He has his beady eye on some Chinese noodles that smelt so delicious as the smoky taste of the oyster sauce hijacked his taste buds, screaming out for his attention, titillating and teasing him, reminding him that they did not appreciate being ignored. So much food, and not enough space to fit it all in. Even 3 days into their trip, he's noticed that the waistband on his trousers has regretfully become significantly tighter. Suffice to say, his wife Tessa was complaining bitterly last night that she could barely pull up the zipper of her skirt, which she was more than a little peeved about. Of course, he'd got the blame. Why does that not surprise him? People don't like to take responsibility for their own choices, do they? I mean, he didn't force his wife to eat all that food, did he? But she was coming down on him like a ton of bricks, as if it was all his fault. "I wish you wouldn't encourage me, Cole," she moans. "If it wasn't your insistence that I tried those spring rolls and that spinach and tomato pasta, I might not be bursting at the seams like a sausage that has been overstuffed."
"Don't blame me for your overindulgences, Tessa. I merely suggested you tasted the food. I didn't expect you to pile your plate high with pasta and with spring rolls after you'd eaten all those smoky, sticky barbecue ribs."
"What are you saying, Cole?" pipes his wife angrily. "That I deserve to have picked up all this weight? How dare you? I may remind you that you were saying, 'Go on, Tess, just try this, try that, oh, have a little more of this.' I hold you 100% responsible for my weight gain. I may remind you that you insisted the other day that I had 2 helpings of the Chinese mango sticky rice pudding."
"Well, you were the one saying you fancied more. No one was forcing you to eat it, were they? I don't recall it required much encouragement on your part for you to go waddling over to the table for a second helping. From what I could see, wild horses weren't going to keep you away."
"Now that's a lovely dig in the guts, Cole. You're really mean. You shouldn't have encouraged me, should you? You were saying I should have had more pudding, as we only live once. The way I'm going, Cole, they'll have to carry me off this cruise liner on a triple-size stretcher, or call the fire brigade to get me out of the bath. I can see it now. Hello, room service. My wife is stuck in the bath. She's so fat she can barely move. Someone needs to lift her out." Cole knows his wife's humour is laced with a measure of truth. If they're both not careful, they may be bouncing off this cruise liner, like 2 buoyant beach balls, rolling back home to their lives in Cleveland, Ohio, barely recognisable to any of their friends, buried beneath mounds of flesh, like 2 great big lumbering walruses. 2 very happy walruses, but lumbering ones nevertheless. It wasn't a pretty picture to paint in one's head, but willpower, self-restraint and self-discipline was hard to acquire when surrounded by such seductive, tasty morsels of food that cajoled, wheedled and beguiled you with their tantalising rich colours, their clouds of steam, and tempting delicious aromas that were recklessly alluring in their persuasive appeal. By all accounts, making a simple decision about whether to canoodle with some pizza or sweet and sour pork was not easy, so it was best just to have both to ensure he didn't miss out. It was always better to have both, wasn't it? Regret should not be entertained, not on a trip like this. Cole had not failed to notice a warning sign outside the gym the other day, cautioning passengers to the very fact that the average person on a cruise liner puts on between 10 to 25 pounds on the trip. The food is so awesome, with exotic, spicy, piquant, aromatic dishes from all parts of the world. And if that's not bad enough, Cole was quick to notice a magnanimous ice cream machine that doled out massive amounts of soft-serve vanilla, chocolate and strawberry ice cream, as if it just flowed out of the taps like water, much like one of those dreamy machines you read about in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. By all accounts, you could be eating soft-serve ice cream all day if you wanted to. So much temptation, so little willpower, no temperance whatsoever. He had remembered all the crates being loaded on the cruise liner on the first day they'd got here. He and his wife had watched the cargo vessels in the loading bay, containing crates of watermelons, bags and bags of potatoes, boxes of cabbages, boxes of tomatoes, crates of flour and sugar. He had looked at all the food and bemusement, shocked by how much food was being loaded on board, but now he understands why. There is food on offer here all the time. So much of it. You can enjoy another dinner served at midnight if you get an attack of the munchies. Suffice to say, he and his wife for the last 3 nights in a row had needed little encouragement and had piled their plates high with blue cheese, brie and English cheddar after a fabulous aerobic performance they thoroughly enjoyed during the nightly entertainment on board the liner. The happy couple had watched the aerobic performance by the gymnasts, who had worked up quite a sweat. So Cole and his wife were hungry from watching those gymnastics. Without fail, every night there had been fabulous entertainment on board the ocean liner, from comedy performances, plays, dancers, singers, aerobic stunts. The sign at the gym reads, "Do you really want to return back home, looking like a big fat blob of jello? How about some aerobic exercises to reduce the damage from overeating, or enlist with some personal training sessions with Rod?" Cole groans at the idea of having some personal trainer by the name of Rod, who probably had a perfectly streamlined body, ripped with enviable muscle, goading him on and on to do another 12 push-ups. Nobody needed that. It reminded Cole of his brief stint in the American Army, when a letter from your girlfriend meant you had to do 100 sit-ups in order for him to get that letter. At the time it had been a price worth paying.
"I'll be damned if I waste my time in a gym," he tells himself. "I'm here on holiday to relax, to thoroughly enjoy myself with my family, and to visit some exciting places. And I'm not going to become like a hamster on a treadmill. That would be insanely ridiculous. I didn't come all this way for that. There's plenty of time for all those mundane activities when I get back home, and when the refrigerator is loaded with all that ghastly rabbit food."
When he and his wife Tess had first boarded the ship and explored its luxurious deck, Cole and his wife had discovered the decks covered with ribbons of ladybirds clustered together in conjoined heaps, curtaining the floors of the cruise liner in their huge numbers. You almost had to push them away with your feet. There were just so many. Cole knew he'd never seen so many lady beetles in his entire life, and pondered as to where they came from, and why so many of these red and black spotted beetles carpeted the ocean liner, on the steps and the upper deck. Tessa had said excitedly, "This has got to be a lucky sign. Do you have any clue how lucky lady beetles are? But why so many, here on an ocean liner? I'm worried people are going to walk all over them, squashing them under their feet, or the staff might sweep them up and throw them overboard. That would be a travesty that only invites bad luck." Cole shrugs his shoulders.
"I hope not, Tess. They're marvellous. I could never harm a lady beetle. As you say, they're considered lucky, and judging by billions that have anointed this ship, obviously luck has ingratiated itself to our lives. Let's hope it sticks. But as to where they come from, I have not got a clue."
Cole and his wife had enjoyed the sighting of seagulls that had cawed above the ship, happily snatching food offerings directed from eager outstretched hands, from people sitting on the balconies of their cabins that overlooked the water. As could be expected, his wife was among many of them, as the biscuits and cake she had pilferaged from the dessert table, just in case they got peckish, had certainly come in useful, as they were thoroughly appreciated by the hungry gulls. Cole grins at the thought of ever being hungry between meals on this cruise liner. It was not going to happen, but his wife was always stashing her acorns away for a rainy day, much like a squirrel. Maybe it was the naturally nurturing side of the female sex, to squirrel away extra provisions. The shopping on board the ship had been lots of fun, with luxurious things on offer, including some pretentious mementos of the ship, from glamorous T-shirts to caps, to mink and fox coats, and gorgeous selections of embellished Rococo Russian dolls, ornately painted in rich, shiny, bright colours, some very extravagantly priced,
displayed behind glass cabinets with fabulously heavy price tags that could take your breath away. Cole had seen one set of Baroque Russian dolls going for $10,000, but they did seem to be adorned with a plethora of gold leaf. Cole had noticed there were lots of Brazilians on the cruise liner, but it was the woman he'd noticed that, like magpies, were driven towards anything that flauntingly glittered and gleamed. Cole had often accused his wife of being over-enthusiastic as a shopper, until he encountered some of these Brazilian ladies on board, who became animated over a 30% discount over some jewellery. The women were squeaking and squealing with delight, like ebullient teenagers. He was secretly rather glad his wife didn't fall for a bargain like they clearly did. It looked like they were getting their knickers in a twist over some colourful stoned rings. Two women were fighting over a turquoise ring, arguing with each other as to whom had seen it first. "I saw it first, it's mine!" "No, it's mine!" "It's mine, I saw it first!" One man intercedes and decides to fix the problem, declaring the woman who picks the hand he's made into a fist behind his back will get the turquoise ring. The women both agree to this decision, and the defeated foe walks away as if the entire world has crashed down on her shoulders. Cole did not believe he'd ever seen such a boot face before. He never believed in bargains. If something had a 30% reduction on it, it was because it was old stock that was difficult to sell. But for some people the word bargain or sale would send them into an excited frenzy, rather like bees around a honey pot. And these Brazilians were no exception. He couldn't understand the language, but the excitement, he did understand that. For a fleeting second during breakfast, Cole glances briefly at the old man, sitting at a wooden table for two, nearest the window, looking out over the ocean longingly, as if his wistful nostalgic thoughts are miles and miles away. The man rather reminds Cole of a comical garden gnome, as the man's angular face boasts a full beard of white hair, overgrown bushy eyebrows that are well in need of a trim, and a full head of white hair, with enviably no sign of a receding hairline. The man looks rather like an old sailor as well, for his skin is weathered, his demeanour rather reflective, if not a teensy-weensy bit sad. Cole noticed that the man has the same breakfast every single day without fail: 2 boiled eggs, a piece of buttered toast, a glass of fresh orange juice, completed with a cup of English breakfast tea. Talk about self-discipline. Cole is unabashedly impressed. "Where are you going?" "I won't be a moment. I'm coming back. Now don't let the waiter take my plate away, will you? I haven't finished all my sushi yet."
His wife feels slightly peeved, rather aggrieved, as she watches her husband striding towards the old man. What's he up to now? She wonders. Cole can be like one of those annoying kids with ADHD, as he can't seem to stay still for very long. "Where is Daddy going?" asks Juno. "Nowhere, sweetheart," says his mother, ruffling his blonde hair affectionately. "Now, why don't you eat your chicken sausage, dear? It looks very delicious." "I want some ice cream. I don't want sausage." "But you can't have ice cream for breakfast." "Why not, Mummy?" "Because you can't, and that's final." "But that isn't final. It comes out of the tap like water. You always let me drink water out of the tap." "That's different, Juno, and you know it. Ice cream is not water, it's full of sugar."
"How do you do it?"
says Cole, as he approaches the old man's table. He notices the piercing blue eyes of the man, who is stroking his white beard reflectively. He looks up and says,
"Sorry, son. Are you talking to me?"
He has a bewildered expression on his face, his albino eyebrows raised above his eyes quizzically, like 2 hairy caterpillars.
"I don't see anyone else here," says Cole, pulling out a chair to sit opposite the man. "Yes, I'm talking to you." "How do I do what?" he asks Cole. "What are you talking about? How do you manage to eat 2 boiled eggs and a piece of toast every day, when there is all that sumptuously delicious food out there, seducing us with their delicious smells? I notice you are very self-disciplined. You were not in the army or marines by any chance, were you?" The man chuckles. "No, never. I guess I'm just set in my ways. I'm a creature of habit, you could say. I've eaten boiled eggs for every day of my life. It's served me well, kept the weight under control, so to speak. Lucky you, says Cole. I swear I've been on this trip only 3 days. I'm already packing on the pounds, he says, patting his waistband. The man smiles at Cole. Where are you from, son? I'm from Cleveland in Ohio. We live in a city there called Westlake. It's 12 miles west of downtown Cleveland. It's in Cuyahoga County. Oh, I know that part of the world quite well, actually. By the way, my name is Hogan Fisher, he says, extending his hands to shake Cole's. His hand is firm and strong, but weathered and sun-kissed. It's nice to meet you, Hogan. My name is Cole. That's astonishing, says the man, doing a double take. My younger brother was called Cole. The splitting image of you he was in his younger days. I'm not joking either. Died 2 years ago, I'm afraid. I'm sorry to hear that, says Cole. It's not easy to lose those we love. Losing a sibling has got to be hard on anyone, especially if they were close. Death is part of the rich tapestry of life, says the man. It happens to us all. It is something that none of us can avoid. I was down in Westlake about 5 years ago, you know. I was attending a funeral there of a good friend of mine. Nice place it was, too. A suburban feel. Lots of restaurants, coffee shops. A conservative feel about it. Yes, I liked it rather a lot. Whereabouts are you from? Asked Cole. Not sure you've ever heard of it. America is a very big place, let's not kid. So many small towns. I'm from Jim Thorpe in Pennsylvania. It's a small, charming town, located in the Pocono Mountains of northeastern Pennsylvania, which is 80 miles from Philadelphia and 100 miles from New York City. You live roughly about 8 hours away from me, I suspect. In terms of America, says Cole, that's not very far. An hour and a half's flight, I imagine. So that's not bad. Something like that, says the man. Before long, Cole is engaged in a long conversation with this man, and his wife Tess is less than enamoured by this unlikely budding friendship, especially when every morning Cole religiously goes to speak to him, like clockwork, pulling up a chair, and even eating breakfast with the man. What a bloody cheek! She feels indignantly irritated, as she can see that her husband has struck up quite a connection with this man. Why is he going out of his way to speak to a random stranger? He told her she was welcome to join them. But what would she have in common with an old codger like that, who looks like he should be downsized to about 1 foot tall and relegated to the shrubbery in the backyard to entertain the garden plants? Let's just say, not to put too fine a point on it, he is the splitting image of that annoying garden gnome she reluctantly owns, and wishes she didn't. An unfortunate, tasteless gift given to her by her mother. She has always wanted to sneakily throw it away. She hates the ghastly, distasteful thing, with its repellent, gaudy gog eyes. She'd love nothing better than to see it sitting at the bottom of her dumpster, keeping the vegetable peelings company. Suffice to say, her assiduous, astute mother always checks that her frightfully lurid garden gnome is poised in pride of place in her vegetable patch, scaring the birds away with its grotesque gouging eyes and its bright red cap. It seems her whimsical mother believes that the contemptible garden gnome has got so much character. "Isn't he sweet, darling?" she had said proudly. "He'll look after all your vegetables for you, keep you company in your yard. You'll never feel alone with him around. He's quite the charmer." When Cole returns to the breakfast table, Tess launches into him. "Why did you leave me and Juno stranded here at the breakfast table? Every single morning you do this. You go and speak to that silly old garden gnome over there," she says brusquely, unable to disguise the note of irritation that rises up in her voice. She's unaware that makes her sound rather like a petulant, whiny, spoilt brat. But she doesn't care. She takes offence at her husband abandoning their table to sit with a perfect stranger he doesn't even know from Adam. "I don't know," says Cole. "I feel drawn to speak to him. He's a very amenable character, you know. I think he's quite lonely. It's nice to make the special effort to have a conversation with him. His wife died 5 years ago, after being hospitalized with pneumonia. He misses her desperately. He comes on these cruises to get away, to visit interesting places and exotic locations around the globe. He's had rather a colourful life, based on what he's telling me. Raised lots of children over the years, something we wish we could do. I think he enjoys our conversations we have together. He says he gets lonely on board this ship. It can't be easy for him.
Well, why doesn't he move into a retirement home then? Meet people that way, Tess snipes vindictively.
Cole looks at his wife aghast. Come on, sweetheart. That's a very mean thing to say. He obviously enjoys his independence, and good for him. I'll have you know he's a terribly charming man. He reminds me of my grandfather.
8 years later, Cole is sanding down the watermarks that have accumulated over the antique dining room table in the outside garage, that ironically has never been used for cars. The whole garage has been used for his carpentry business. This is a job he's been meaning to do for his wife for many long years now, but he's put it off time and time again. His 16-year-old son, Juno, is sanding down the old coffee table that has also got watermarks from people leaving wet mugs on the wooden surfaces. You know what you should do, Dad? Once we've restored the wood, we should get glass made to measure, to fit above the furniture, so people don't leave behind unsightly watermarks. They'll place their glasses and mugs on glass instead. It'll help to protect the wood. You've got to admit it's a good idea.
It's a very good idea, son. You know, I always give our guests coasters, but they always fail to use them, so the glass might be a solution.
Cole feels his phone vibrating in his chino pants and pulls it out of the side pocket and answers.
Cole speaking. Is this Cole Irvin? Comes an official voice.
Cole, who is covered from head to toe with dust, wipes some of the dust from his perspiring face away with the back of his hand and stands up to attention. Even his son stops sanding and is staring up at him as he senses that this is not just a random phone call, judging by the businesslike tone of his father's voice.
Are you the Cole Irwin that went on a Baltic cruise 8 years ago, on the Royal Caribbean cruise liner, visiting Norway, Russia, places like that? That's right, I did. What is all this about? Now look, if you're advertising for more cruises, I'm not interested. I'm sorry, I can't afford another cruise. But yes, the trip we had on the cruise liner was very good. Do you remember meeting a man on the cruise liner, calling himself Hogan Fisher, from the little town of Jim Thorpe in Pennsylvania? Does that ring any bells for you? That's right, I remember him. Very nice old man. I often had breakfast with him every morning. I regret to have to tell you, Paul Hogan died 6 months ago, after a short illness. It was bladder cancer, I'm afraid, that took him. Quite fast it was. He didn't suffer, you'll be glad to know. Well, I'm sorry to hear the dreadful news, really I am. But without wishing to sound rude, what has this old man's passing got to do with me? We've been trying to trace you, Mr. Irwin, for quite some time. I'm very glad to have finally found you. You see, Mr. Hogan Fisher left you his estate, most of it. The house, of course, is in a bad state of repair, but it's a good fixer-upper for you. He did leave you $5 million in his bank account. Is this some kind of a bad joke? Says Cole. Because if it is, I'm not laughing. Sir, I don't appreciate that kind of humour. Some people might find it funny, but I don't. Because when I realise that this is a wind-up, I'm going to be very disappointed. Amused? Certainly not. No, this is not a bad joke, says the official voice, sounding slightly put out. Allow me to introduce myself to you. My name is Mr. Andrew Fryer. I am the attorney dealing with Hogan Fisher's estate. I knew him personally very well. I've already said too much over the phone to you, but you get the gist of everything. But why? I don't understand. Why did he leave me everything? That's nonsensical, pipes Cole. I barely knew the man. He told me he raised about 12 children. Why would he not leave his estate to them? He did leave all his children plenty of money, so they've been given some cash, and a lot of it too. But he didn't want to give them too much. I gather he's written you a letter explaining everything. We would heartily appreciate you to come and view the property you've inherited. The estate agents are keen to know if you want to sell it. It's been sitting there abandoned for 6 months. There's been graffiti scribbled over the walls. The place is in a little bit of a mess, but it is something that can be easily fixed.
Cole puts down the phone and stares at his son nonplussed.
What's wrong, Dad? You're scaring me. What's going on? I've only gone and inherited $5 million and a house in a bad state of repair from a complete stranger on a cruise ship. You probably won't remember him. You were 8 at the time.
Cole's account. After I spoke to the attorney on the phone that day, whom had announced that a random stranger I briefly met on a cruise liner, called Hogan Fisher, had left me most of his estate, aside from a sizable amount left to some foster children he had raised. I was dumbfounded by this. All my life I'd worked hard for a living, sometimes working my butt off, often taking extra jobs to pay the family bills. It was my wife's more affluent parents who had paid for our trip on the cruise liner as a 30th birthday present for her. I could never have afforded such an extravagant holiday with my meagre income as a carpenter. I was the kind of person that never won a damn thing in my entire life. It was other people that won raffles or competitions or the lottery, but I'd never ever been lucky like that. Growing up, I'd always believed God had favourites, of which I was clearly not one of them. Being a carpenter like his son Jesus, you'd think he'd have a soft spot for me, would you not? But not so. The last few years had been exceedingly tough. Life had been a huge struggle financially for me and my family. We had been through some precariously rough times together, where our family had to receive a helping hand from my wife's mother. I loathed that. It always made me feel very humiliated, accepting handouts from your in-laws. Tessa's mother had these unfortunate eyes that bored into you like a woodpecker's beak, and I could sense she was thinking, "You're not looking after my girl properly." That look of hers would make me inwardly squirm. I recall all the lady beetles on the Princess cruise ship, and how my wife said it meant bountiful luck was on our way, and it seemed to have arrived at our front door so serendipitously, 8 years later. It was nothing short of extraordinary. It was hard to assimilate such great news. A perfect stranger on a cruise ship had left me most of his estate, $5 million as well. Let's just say I didn't jump up and down for joy as you might have expected. News like this takes time to assimilate. For a while it seems so surreal. That celebration is certainly far from your mind. You're in a state of suspended shock. You're almost afraid that if you get excited, you'll find it wasn't real after all. My family had painstakingly taken the long 8-hour drive to the charming town of Jim Thorpe. The once palatial house was more like a grandiose mansion that had lost some of its sparkling sheen. It ached with age, groaned from neglect, cried out for attention, like a bedraggled vagrant begging for a new outfit of clothes. It was situated about 20 minutes from the town, in a rural location, where I was about to meet the realtor, who was to show me the imposing property herself that I'd inherited, and was possibly eager to take it off my hands and put it on the market ASAP. I was not in such a hurry to make such a fleeting decision. The theatrical mansion was not what I had anticipated. It was a 3-story colonial, on about an acre's lot of land, that was shaded by gnarled oaks and silver maples that were old enough to remember farmland, the town's ancient coal mining history, and the famous athlete Jim Thorpe, who was of American, Indian, Sauk and Fox descent, who won 2 gold medals for America in basketball and lacrosse, I believe it was. The Imperial House is a vision of English character and charm, offering you romantic images of large, cosy fireplaces, fabulous crystal chandeliers, and servants' quarters hidden beneath a grey slate roof. The builders had spared no expense back in the gilded optimism of 1923. My 38-year-old wife stares up at the stately brick facade, the slate windows, with an expression of wondrous awe on her face, as if she cannot believe that the stately home is officially ours, despite its dog-eared condition. My wife is an attractive woman, who always wears her long dark hair swept away from her face in an uncomplicated neat ponytail. She looks more like a teenager, rather than a woman approaching 40, with a pair of fake Gucci designer glasses that she wears on top of her head like a tiara. Her sophisticated fashion sense, the silk scarf draped artfully over her shoulders, the more angular contours of her face, would probably betray her age on closer inspection, making you realize that she wasn't a teenager, but from the distance you would certainly not know that she wasn't. I notice my wife is looking rather apprehensive. She stares up at the house, as despite its epic, stately appearance, something about this place clearly ruffles the hairs on the back of her neck, as it does mine. The realtor leads us both cordially down the flagstone path. As I glance around the property, it is clear by the looks of things that some things need fixing up, beyond the untended house itself. The verdant lawn is overgrown and tangled with weeds. The flower beds are in serious need of a good mulching, while the edging needs tidying up. The eaves of the house are peeling extensively. The whole house needs replastering and painting to restore its resplendent exterior appearance, as the existing white paint has degraded significantly over time. The dust and dirt of the natural environment has soiled the paint, invited on its surfaces a plethora of unsightly cracks. I observe a black cat with a white bib crossing our path. It stares at us for a brief moment with an air of indifference and hurriedly saunters around the building, disappearing from our sight. I love cats and wonder if he had belonged to Hogan Fisher and has now become feral, living wild, eating a diet of rats. Cats can be resourceful animals when needs must. This thought grievously upsets me, as so often, after people die, their domestic animals are easily overlooked. Me and my wife continue up the stairs of the grand portico. "Look," says the estate agent nervously, running a perfectly manicured hand through her short mane of hazel hair. "I'm going to level with the two of you. This house is in need of a lot of work, but for the right buyer, it's a great opportunity. In our opinion, it is worth putting on the market as is. But if you do so in the present condition, your asking price will need to be relatively low. On the other hand, if you were to fix this place up yourselves and finally sell it, you could make a bomb. I'm afraid in its current condition, it's more likely to turn buyers away, especially with the unfortunate ominous graffiti that has been painted all over the place, some of it more than a little sinister. But try to reserve judgment, as dare I say this house has very good bones and great potential to become quite a stunner. A place like this in Boston, if in good condition, could easily set you back $3 to $4 million. Are you from Boston, sir?" "No, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio," I say. "Funny," she said. "I could swear the solicitor said you were from Boston. I must have got my wires all crossed." I gasp with a measure of incredulity, as my nasal cavity is greeted to a hostile, gross smell of festering garbage filtering through the house, accompanied by damp and mildew. I observe dirty food wrappers, drug paraphernalia, strewn haphazardly over the oak floors. I realise this place has recently been used by squatters, but thankfully they have been successfully evicted. I'm stunned when I see piles of rags in the middle of the floor, tossed all over the place, flung out of what looks like a dilapidated suitcase that is falling apart at the seams. There are slogans on the wall that read, "The living dead reside here. Welcome to the death zone." Other slogans read, "Get out before it's too late. Watch your back, or I will slice a knife into your guts when you're not looking." I cringe in horror at the macabre wording, all in bright red paint. The estate agent observes my mortified expression. "It happens," she says empathetically. "You get all kinds of mean graffiti splashed over abandoned houses, especially vintage heritage homes like this, with historic influences. People always presuppose that such properties must be haunted. But if it gives you a measure of reassurance, I've never heard such rumours about this place. The custom features of the house compete with the menacing messages and the lingering scent of garbage that pollutes the air with its vile repugnance. I was sure amidst all the filth were a couple of decaying rats that were only exacerbating the revolting stench. It was hard to fathom that Hogan Fisher had lived in this sprawling mansion alone, long after his wife had died. Even for the three of us, this baronial property was way too large, and for a single couple to have lived together for so many years in this place seemed almost incomprehensible. As if reading my thoughts like a book, the realtor intercedes. Look, the man who lived in this property was away a lot. By all accounts, he never did any maintenance work on the place after his wife died. You'll see when we get to the top floor. One section is very pristine, with a kitchen area that flows into a sitting room. It would appear that the gentleman lived in the restored section of the property all the time, like living in your own apartment. But he willfully abandoned the rest of the house. It just got too much for him. I think he never had the heart to sell the place. It represented his long, happy marriage, and all the beautiful memories that accompanied it. So it would be like letting his wife go. I guess if you were fixing this place, you could move into that section of the property, while the house was being refurbished, and brought back to speed, that is. If that is your intention, of course.
But I don't understand why a couple live in a place this large, I asked, looking quite flummoxed. It was clearly too big for the both of them. They were out of their depth.
Oh, you don't know, then? The couple in their younger days always had foster kids living here. About 12 children, I gather it was. They didn't have children of their own, you see. They so wanted a large family. I believe I have something for you, she says suddenly, fiddling around in her purse and bringing out a letter for me. This, I believe, is for you. The attorney asked me to pass it your way. I take the letter eagerly.
Give me a moment while I read this,
I tell the both of them. I open the letter, which reads,
Dear Cole, you're probably wondering why a perfect stranger you met on a Royal Caribbean cruise liner is leaving you their estate, as we only got acquainted over 8 days on that trip. I've been on a plethora of cruises around the world, but no one has cordially come up to me like you did so naturally, or even shown any interest in me. You were a friend to me on that cruise. I enjoyed and appreciated our conversations. Not only did you remind me of my brother Cole, but you also have a very similar sense of humour to him. We had some very good laughs together, the two of us. After my wife died, I was a very lonely man. But for 8 days on that cruise liner, I didn't experience loneliness, thanks to your very great kindness, and for that I will be eternally grateful. It is for this reason that I am leaving you most of my estate. Of course, I have given a sizable amount of money to my foster children, so they have been taken care of in this regard. But I never believe in leaving young people too much money. It invites laziness, reduces the seeds of ambition. So showering them with too much money would be doing them a vast disservice, in my humble opinion, that is. In regards to this house you will be inheriting, it was at one time rather grand. For its time, that is. But it does require a great deal of work. But it might be worth salvaging, if of course you have the energy to do so. Yours truly, with very great appreciation, Hogan Fisher.
What did the letter say? Asks my wife, as the realtor leads us to other parts of the house.
He left me the house, I whisper, because I made a lonely old man feel less lonely. He doesn't want any of his foster kids to live with entitlement, which is why he didn't give them all the money.
My wife gasps. He wrote that to you? I feel so bad. I looked at him as an old garden gnome. But look at him. He left everything to you. I feel heartily ashamed. I was the one cross with you for giving up your time to have breakfast with him. But I had no idea he felt so isolated. I can't believe people never interacted with him on cruises.
He must have been so terribly lonely. Poor man. It's desperately sad. What has happened to the furniture in this house? I asked the realtor. Oh, Hogan wrapped it up in bubble wrap. He put it in the outbuilding. By all accounts, it's in good condition. And once the house has been refurbished, it can be replaced back into the property. There's some incredible antiques among the items. I dare say you've inherited them all. Some of them could fetch you a tidy sum. Better still, I gather there's an expensive collection of artwork in there that might fetch you a pretty penny. Or you might choose to keep it, of course. And none of these treasures are stolen? How is that possible? No, nothing was taken. Mr. Hogan hid everything behind barrel loads of hay, so no one would know the treasure trove was there. The solicitors did, of course. By all accounts, he was a resourceful man who thought outside of the box. I think he put everything away to refurbish the house himself. He couldn't do it in the end, after his wife died. He didn't have the energy, lost heart. I suppose you could say he lost his mojo, which is understandable in the circumstances. The estate agent shrugs. If it were me, I'd fall apart if my husband wasn't around. It couldn't have been easy for poor Mr. Hogan, losing his wife, as indeed it is for anyone. Folks said the couple were madly in love until the day she dropped down dead. Now what's great about this property that you might not realise is the ruralness of your location, but you're not too far from town either, which is very beneficial. Now if you look out of the windows you will see prepossessing views overlooking a farmer's field. It's difficult to see them now, as the backyard is one sprawling, expansive, overgrown wilderness. But when the lawn is mown, you will be in awe of the spectacular scenery that you can feast your eyes upon. You will see beyond this house that there is a dividing picket fence overlooking a farmer's field, where he keeps horses. There's a sprawling woodgrove that meanders down the left-hand side of the valley, stretching back for many miles, full of the most fabulous walking trails for your family to enjoy. Here's the good news, the great news if you like. Within the picket fence there's a gate, which gives you access to the farmer's field. You see, the original landowner of this property owned all the adjoining land. He sold the land off in his old age, but there was one stipulation. That was anyone that lived in this house could have direct access to the land for hikes and walks, and this legally signed document still applies today. So you are welcome to go rambling in the countryside. You won't be trespassing on the farmer's land. It's an added bonus. Come, says the estate agent, I need to show you the rest of the property. So me and Tess obediently trail behind her, torn between reluctance and curiosity. I discern that the iron radiator has been pulled out of the wall in the lower foyer, but the original oakwood floorboards are still perfectly in place. Only a handful of the panels are badly warped. Some are lightly wobbly and groan under your feet, but those are problems that can easily be fixed. There's a large leaded glass window over and above the grand mahogany front door. The heights of the ornate edge ceilings give a palatial feeling to the property, but silvery cobwebs dangle in every corner. Their spoke-like spiral wheels seem to twinkle in the light of the morning sunshine that infuses through the windows of the house. The windows of the house framed by curtains once so lavishly grand, so prestigious, now frayed, faded, dull, their ornate designs horribly bleached by the sun, the quality fabric now exhausted from wear and tear, a plethora of sun-damaged and ravaged by hungry moths. I'm struck by the inward revelation that at one time this house must have looked utterly magnificent. Juno, my teenage son, is walking ahead of us curiously, investigating every room, his grim expression revealing a strong disapproval. I knew he hated the house already, but his attitude almost immediately shifted when he saw the little area of the house that Hogan had preserved for himself. Even I gasped at this exclusive, luxurious, fully furnished, well-appointed apartment within the house, upon which no expense had been spared, on the 3rd floor, big enough for all 3 of us to reside in, but like a grand suite in the Waldorf Astoria that had been superbly decorated, with state-of-the-art kitchen and very eclectic stylish furnishings, with fabulous views of the countryside that were spectacular,
All this discreetly tucked away in a grand, dilapidated mansion, like a treasure trove in a dusky cave.
I don't understand, I say. The whole house is covered in graffiti. Why has this apartment escaped such brutality? It makes no sense at all.
Well, until a day ago, admits the estate agent, the solicitor was very good friends with Hogan Fisher. He boarded off this part of the house. He figured that vandals would get their grubby little hands on this place, so he ensured this part of the premises was cut off from prying eyes. His efforts seem to have paid off. I'm sure this place would have been badly trashed otherwise. After viewing the colonial home, me and my wife and son Juno decide to move from Ohio to this colonial property, an 8-hour drive from Cleveland. We would live in the apartment area of the property and refurbish the remaining of the house, selling it on later for a lot more money. It was a profitable investment. We both sensed that this is what Hogan Fisher would have appreciated us doing, as we were preserving a heritage. 8 months later, it was hard to believe that the alterations were finally finished, that we were now living in such a beautiful part of the world. Thoughts of my life in Cleveland, Ohio, had deserted me. I was thoroughly enjoying this new life, and Jim Thorpe was a beautiful town indeed. In a short space of time, we'd made so many friends. My son had never been happier at his school, so thoughts of selling our property were far from our minds, as we loved living in this luxurious home that looked superb with all its original stylish furniture, now replaced. I had awoken one morning to discover the black and white cat lying at the bottom of our bed, as if he'd lain here before many times with Hogan Fisher. We adopted the cat, calling him Bibbs, because of his white bib on his chest. He fast became a much-beloved member of our family. One day as my wife was drying dishes around the sink, after we had finished dinner, I hear her screaming loudly. I quickly dash into the kitchen to see what the hell is wrong.
I saw a face at the window! A face at the window!
She explains.
It was staring at me! Big yellow eyes! It was terrifying! It disappeared! I don't know what it was!
I decide to investigate my wife's rather strange, curious account, and armed with my torchlight, I begin to investigate the yard. And that is when I see this tall, black silhouette gliding into the woodgrove, finally disappearing from sight. My first thought is, what the hell is that? My wife looks alarmed when she sees me grabbing my rifle, loading it, and quickly dashing out of the house.
Did you see it too? She asks. I saw something. I'll be back in a trice. I'm just going to investigate. But are you sure that's a good idea? Whatever this thing was, it was very scary, very intimidating.
I won't be long, I say, opening the gate in the fence, dashing through the farmer's field hurriedly, which is thankfully empty of frolicking horses on this night. I am in the field now, stumbling awkwardly in my walking boots over stumps of uneven, rough turf that are quick to ensnare my feet in their treacherous, inconspicuous earthen traps. Then there are clandestine dips in the ground. Finally I manage to reach the tall vertical silhouettes of the trees that stretch towards the tenebrous heavens in a proud, regal, stately repose, all clustered together in a large, expansive group. The light of my torch guides the way as I enter this woodland oasis, with a slight sense of trepidation, surprised to find that my heart is thudding in my chest. My breathing is fast and furious. I'm not actually sure why. I follow the direction of the idiosyncratic creature's movements as I try desperately to retrace its footsteps. I don't even know if I'm going the right way, or why I'm actually following this thing, but I feel as if I'm being pulled into this woodgrove, like a magnet thundering towards the iron filings, as if some outer-worldly, greater force beyond my own control is luring me to this place. I do fight the desire to abandon this crazy pursuit, but have you ever tried to separate a magnet from its polar opposite? It's not easy. For some reason, each step propels me ever forwards, and even though a foreboding reluctance, a hesitancy, a consternation, a sense of disquiet are my walking companions tonight, that whisper faint warnings in my ears. A dogged, tenacious obstinacy consumes me, that is no match for those creeping doubts that are hammering at my head. Don't do it! Don't do it! Don't go in there! Whatever this thing was, my insatiable curiosity is aroused, governed by an overwhelming need to know. I want to find out exactly what I've seen. But a small part of me is reminding me that curiosity killed the cat. We all know this well. But even those warnings did nothing to curtail, nor subdue my impassioned resolve to find answers. I don't want to be sitting at the breakfast table tomorrow morning, stirring my cornflakes around and saying, "I saw a shadowy being darting into the woods last night, and I don't know the hell what it was." That would annoy me greatly, like a buzzing fly you desperately want to squat, and always eludes you. I had never been in the Woodgrove before, but at night it felt inauspiciously bodeful. There was a soft silvery moonlight that puddled through the trees, caressing the unyielding darkness with an ethereal luminescence, so that some of the obscure undulating shapes of the trees could be more easily discerned. But in this esoteric, mysterious light, with its haunting, ghostly, foreboding qualities, the dark shadows that lingered through the trees seemed all the more menacing. I had this overwhelming sense that not only was I being watched, but scrutinized and studied, by eyes that hungrily hid beneath the twilight. The wind, with its gentle, soft breeze, blows through the trees in sweeping forward gusts, as if cold, icy hands are brushing against my face. The deciduous forest is filled with red maples, ginkgo, aspen, ash, and sumac trees, which appear to be jiggling and swaying their boughs. Yet despite the breeze, the forest is quiet. So quiet, in fact, I realize that even the frogs and crickets are not honouring the night with their usual tuneful chorus. This poignant revelation disturbs me somewhat. I've heard stories of hunters before, over the years, claiming that when the forest becomes ominously quiet like this, that there may be a predator in your midst. I clutch my rifle very tightly, as if to assure myself of the protection at my disposal. That offers me a persuasive reassurance. I know with the forest feeling as sinister as it does now, I should almost certainly make tracks back home. Then I see her. I stop dead in my tracks, my body freezing like an ice statue at a celebratory banquet. The soft moonlight streams through the cracks in the forest canopy, dipping hungrily through the branches, filtering over this outlandish creature, highlighting her form. I see her in her sizable glory. This was not what I was expecting to see. Not at all. I realize to my amazement I'm staring at a Bigfoot. For a moment, time stands still, as if holding back the hands of a clock. The creature does not flinch. She stares at me through deep-set treacle eyes that exude a bright yellow eyeshine. I feel as though she's looking right through me, reading my very thoughts. But all I'm thinking is, bloody hell! Is this a dream or what? The creature remains still, as if she comprehends my astonishment and is helping me absorb the reality of what I'm perceiving with a persevering patience. My heart thunders in my chest so loudly, my whole body quivers nervously. This creature, she is so large. She's built like a giant, with the gait and shape of a human. So intimidating, so daunting, so arrestingly lofty. Standing at easily 9 foot tall, 800 pounds, her majestic body is covered in long flowing dark hair that is moving as the wind does, caresses its silken waves that serve to only highlight the skin beneath, revealing the dense ripped muscle, accentuating her powerful build. She has the breasts of a hardened female athlete, small and firm. I notice her head seems to meander down her shoulders in a seamless sweep. The top of her head reaches a pronounced tip, but her leathery grey face is so human. Despite how all-consuming her presence is, I find her humanness makes her seem relatable, approachable, even familiar,
as if we have much in common, even if we are extraordinarily different. I notice her face is rather feminine, reminding me of the pictures I've seen of the Egyptian queen Nefertiti, although her nose is considerably flatter against the face. She continues to study me curiously. I hear the words in my head. "Do not be afraid. I mean you no harm." For a moment I tremble in my boots. Where the heck did that voice come from? I look around me, from the left to the right, as if to see if someone else is standing there, talking to me. But she is all I see. I realize that this curious creature was talking to me in my head, in some kind of telepathic exchange. Had she read my mind? Did she know that I was intimidated and daunted by her mighty presence? I'm quite sure she knew absolutely everything I was thinking, and that was not a good feeling at all. It made me feel so conspicuous, so vulnerable, so transparent. The creature's eyes are steadily fixed on me, as if her eyes have become arms that are holding me down so that I don't dare leave. She has no need to worry about that, based on how unstable I'm feeling on my legs right now. I hardly think I'm capable of moving off or running away. I feel like a wobbly, cumbersome camping table, missing 3 or 2 of its legs, and trying to support its weight on the remaining ones. A shoddy structure that is collapsing at the knees, soon to crumble. Even the rifle in my hands has loosened. My sweating fingers are causing it to slide away, until it lands precariously at my feet. I don't dare reach down to retrieve it. That would be a foolish thing to do. The creature might think I'm intending to use it on her. I'd never dare do such an outrageous thing. She may be benevolent and non-aggressive, but irrespective of her sweet, somewhat charming demeanour, I can't help but be afraid. Me and my wife went to a tiger sanctuary in Thailand once. We were led to the tiger enclosure and told we could cuddle the tiger. It was benign, with not a nasty bone in his body, we were assured. Did any of us actually cuddle that tiger? Absolutely not, for we knew that irrespective of how docile the tiger appeared, we were still in the presence of a dangerous predator. I never saw one single visitor stepping beyond the boundaries of just stroking the tiger's coat, but even that they did with a degree of grudgingly restrained hesitancy. That's what it felt like in the presence of this Bigfoot. I was fully aware of her power, her strength and might, and my own fragility by contrast. The female Bigfoot blasts the silence with a shrill whistle that travels through the woodgrove. Another Bigfoot appears on the scene, also female, but shorter and stockier, and in her arms she's carrying a human baby in a pink onesie. The next thing I know is that a little baby that looks recently born is being lowered into my arms. It is fully human and begins to cry. I am so stunned, I don't actually know how to react. "We found her," I hear the words in my head. "You must take care of her. We have chosen you." The very large Bigfoot taps me on the back and then glides away into the forest and is gone from my sight. Although as I leave I hear some whistles being exchanged in the forest and realise that there must be other Bigfoots in the grove, helping in this rescuing effort. As I trudge back to the farmer's meadow, with a baby in one arm, a torch and a rifle in another, I finally make my way back to the farmhouse. My wife races outside. Her face is looking very distressed and distraught, but on seeing the bundle in my arm, she does a double take. "Oh my God! Where did you find her? She's so tiny! Where did she come from? She's adorable, beautiful." I decided not to tell her about the Bigfoots I'd encountered, as even I was finding it hard to get my head around my incongruous story. And I lived it. I knew if my wife made such claims to me, I'd think she was making it all up. I just told her I found the baby. I lied to her about the Bigfoot, telling her I wasn't able to see what the shadowy being was. Tessa's account. I do not know if our lives are mapped out before we're born, whether perhaps we're expected to travel down certain paths or not, as somehow it seemed no accident that Hogg and Fisher's lavish resplendent home had now become ours. It felt right. I will say this, From the moment we moved into the house, leaving aside the morbid messages of the graffiti, the obvious neglect, and of course the ghastly smell left by some unwelcome guests, the house fitted us like a glove, only it was rather large for a family of 3. Would have been much more suitable for a family like the Von Trapps in The Sound of Music. That was the kind of family me and my husband had always longed for. It was unfortunate after the birth of my son Juno. I was given a hysterectomy due to a prolapsed uterus and was told I could never have kids again. Let's just say that I was more than a little devastated. I do remember crying for many weeks about it. I could also tell that this revelation had hit my husband hard in the guts. He had adored the idea of a family bursting at the seams with a plethora of children. Now it was not meant to be. Of course he was realistic, and since we had so many financial issues earlier on in our lives, and were struggling to take care of just one kid, we had come to the swift conclusion that maybe we were not meant to have more children. We reached that place of resigned acceptance when you learn to accept the lot you've been dealt. As my husband was so quick to point out, some people, despite years of trying, still do not have any children of their own, and we were lucky to just have one. I knew he was right, of course. I tried to be happy about it, but it was a losing, defeated battle. My mother seemed to think that buying a garden gnome for me would ultimately solve all my problems. And I say this without exaggeration. Some people can be peculiar, and my mother is one of those people. "I find the garden gnomes so terribly cheerful," she told me. "You don't need more children, my dear. If you have 100 garden gnomes in your yard, you'll never ever feel alone. And better still, they don't leave home like your children do. They don't disappoint you like that. Mine have been such a great source of comfort for me over the years. Apart, of course, from the rude, obnoxious letters from neighbours telling me I'm lowering the tone of our neighbourhood. Can you believe it? What a cheek, some people." I could believe it, although I said absolutely nothing. But I certainly loathe going to visit my mother's eccentric home, for that very reason. As wherever you look, you can't escape a garden gnome leering at you. And if that's not bad enough, my mother has one in her downstairs toilet, sitting opposite the loo on a glass dresser. I felt as if this thing was just staring at me when I was taking a leak. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I got such a dreadful shock. My mum said she put it there so that the guests did not feel lonely when they went to the toilet. Are you kidding me? Long before we moved to this grand colonial house, before my husband had even met Hogg and Fisher on that cruise liner, one night I had a very strange, peculiar dream that was so lucid I couldn't tell whether it was real or not. I remember I'd never seen this woman a day in my life. She was about 4 foot tall, petite, with short grey hair, brown sparkling eyes that twinkled with humour. I remember she wore a bright emerald green tunic dress, which had tassels on the end of the fabric and along the collar line. She wore white shoes and a striking emerald pendant around her neck that glittered so brightly. "Don't you worry, dear," she'd said to me. "One day you'll have a big family. It's all been arranged. Just be patient. It'll come your way." I thought nothing of this strange, incredulous event, but it disturbed me that I had a dream of a woman's face so clear in my mind that I could remember every feature and detail of her face and her clothes. In my normal dreams, I have just impressions and images that are so much more abstract and vague. The pictures almost hazy and blurred in my mind, and recalling the details is very difficult. But this dream was different. It was pronounced, eloquent, and exceedingly detailed, and as translucently clear as spring water. Once the building construction had occurred in our home. On one occasion one of the builders came forwards to me and said, "Ma'am, there's a woman waiting to see you at the front door." I quickly went to the front door, but no one was there, nor was there any sign of a strange truck in the drive. If there was someone there, where had they got to? "There's no one there," I told the builder. "What did this woman look like?" "Oh," he said, "she was 4 foot tall, with short grey hair and brown eyes." "I don't know anyone as short as that," I told him. "What was she wearing?" "She was wearing an emerald green tunic dress, with tassels on the upper collar and fringe of the garment. an emerald pendant around her neck, and white shoes on her feet. She looked very smart, very well dressed indeed." When the builder said this, my heart almost skipped a beat. The woman he was describing sounded like the woman from my dreams over 9 years ago. How was that even possible? "Are you all right, ma'am?" says the builder. "You've gone quite pale." Days passed, and one day one of the builders, in the process of renovating the bookshelves in the library, brought me a large cardboard box he'd found lying in the corner of a cupboard. He explained, "It's up to you, ma'am, if you want to throw this out or not. But I thought I needed to bring it to your attention." "Thank you," I said. "Just put it down in the kitchen for me." I'm not sure what I was expecting to uncover in this box. The first thought that came into my head was that this was a long-since forgotten box of old Christmas decorations, but it was best to check the contents before discarding anything. I rubbed my hand curiously across the box. I realised my hands are now covered in a fine dust. I used a pair of paper scissors to cut through the tape that binds the cardboard together. I discovered to my amazement that the box contains piles of old letters, which are love letters written to Ruth Fisher from her husband Hoggin Fisher before they ever got married. Some of the letters are the most romantic letters I have ever had the pleasure to read, written on high-quality paper with beautiful curly writing. I then stumble across a framed picture of a woman in a photograph, a woman I recognise. She's smiling brightly into the camera. She's 4 foot tall, with grey short hair, brown eyes, wearing an emerald tunic dress with tassels on the collar and the bottom fringe of the tunic. Even more astonishing is she's wearing the emerald pendant that I'd seen in my dream. More striking than anything else is that this is the woman I'd seen in my dream 9 years earlier, telling me I would have a big family one day, and to more or less be patient about it. Furthermore, the builder had described seeing a woman asking for me at the front door, who subsequently disappeared into thin air, but she fitted exactly the same description. My heart is now racing. I try to make sense of everything. I found dozens of photographs of Hoggin and his wife in younger days, with about 12 children in the household. I recall the realtor saying that Hoggin and his wife would take in foster children in their house and raise them in a loving environment as their own. It is in a separate box I discover the emerald pendant. I put it around my neck. I somehow sensed that Hoggin's wife Ruth would want me to have it. One night I was lying on my bed in the bedroom, reading a book. My husband was in one of the outbuildings with my son, attending to a couple of antiques from the house that needed repolishing. My husband liked to teach Juno everything he knew about carpentry. Juno was excellent with his hands. Recently he had put up the cabinetry in a kitchen for his best friend's family home, and they were very impressed with the results. So much like his father, Juno was exceedingly good with his hands. I was alone on my bed, with the black and white cat Bibbs lying across my body. He looked completely passed out after the cooked salmon I'd given him earlier on in the evening. All of a sudden I hear a woman's beautiful voice tumbling across the hallway, singing a tuneful song. It's Mitch Miller's song, The Yellow Roses of Texas. That was a song my dad used to love to sing when I was a little girl, so for me it carries the nostalgic perfumed scent of very sweet times that I spent with him. I sit up in bed with a start. Bib jumps off the bed. He pads over to the door. He behaves as if he's greeting someone in the doorway, someone I can't see. He's rubbing against their legs and purring, but no one is there. There are no legs to rub against. I watch this bizarre incident with a level of trepidation. What can Bib see that I can't? And who was that singing that song? I had distinctly heard a woman's voice. I never imagined that. Is there someone in our house, or is there a television left on somewhere? But no sooner am I satisfied after checking every room in the house and being met with a firm silence. I know that no one is there. So I retire to my bed once again, and the moment my head hits the pillow, I hear the tuneful song yet again teasing me. Whoever this woman is, she can most certainly sing. I leap out of bed frantically, dashing down the sweeping staircase, switching on the lights everywhere, calling into rooms, "Hello, is anyone there?" But there is no answer. In truth, I'm not sure exactly what I'm feeling. I'm not scared, But I'm not exactly enamoured either. Someone is moving around my house, singing a fabulous song, but then no one is there. I realise that this house of ours is steeped in a long, rich, vibrant history. It does, of course, occur to me that what I may have experienced could be outer-worldly. I decide to go into the kitchen to make myself a cup of chamomile tea with honey, to calm down my frazzled nerves, as every hair on my body is standing up on edge. I'm preparing the tea, and then there she is, standing before me, as crystal clear as the day. The petite 4-foot woman, with grey hair, brown sparkling eyes, and an emerald tassel dress. She's even wearing the same emerald pendant around her neck that I now frequently wear. For a moment I think I'm going absolutely mad. The woman of my lucid dream 9 years prior, whom revealed herself to me before me and my husband ever went on that cruise liner. She told me I'd have a big family, and this was before my husband even met the old man, Mr. Fisher. This was the same woman from the photograph I found in the cardboard box. Her name was Ruth Fisher, the woman the builder had seen standing at the front door, requesting to see me. She's now in my kitchen, smiling warmly at me, as if it's the most natural thing in the world to do. But there is nothing natural about this encounter whatsoever. The woman I am seeing right now has been easily dead for over 14 years. This is Hogan Fisher's wife. Why is she here? What does she want from me? You could be forgiven for thinking she was real, as for a short while she's like the most perfect hologram, vivid, clear, every detail of her face pronounced, although there is a static electric sound in her presence. For a moment my throat is so scratchy, even though I want to say something, I just can't. I stand in the kitchen gawking at the woman, in abject astonishment. Is this really happening? Of course not. This can't be happening. It just can't. Ruth looks at me and says, "Your first will be here soon. You'll be having 12. I told you it'll be a large family. It's all been arranged. I must go now." The apparition of Ruth turns around and walks away, and as she does so, she becomes fainter and fainter and fainter until she's finally gone. I'm standing there in unabated shock, my knees trembling, my whole body shaking, my mind only articulating one thought. What the hell is this all about? Of course I wanted to tell my husband what I'd seen. I'd seen the woman who was married to Hogan, who had lived in this house with so many children that she had fostered over the years. This same woman had visited me in a dream, before we even met Hogan, on that cruise liner. If that wasn't crazy enough, I'd seen a full-bodied apparition manifest in my newly refurbished kitchen, telling me I'm going to have 12 children, with one now on the way. I knew it must be this woman called Ruth, whom had been singing the Yellow Roses of Texas as well. She had been married to Hogan in life. She had come to tell me this from beyond the grave. It seemed ludicrously nonsensical, so I kept this matter to myself, marvelling as to what it could actually mean, and wondering if it meant anything at all. The night I'd seen the strange face staring at me through the kitchen window, I don't believe I've ever felt as much fear as I did in that moment. It was dark outside. I could discern this daunting, huge, shapely silhouette, easily 8 foot tall, the owner of a massive pair of yellow eyes, staring in at me through the window. I'd been drying plates with a towel that I was placing on the drying rack besides the large Frankie sink. My hand loosened its grip on the plate. It slid out of my hand, hitting the floor with a mighty, thunderous crash. I screamed, the sound of my voice echoing through the high ceilings of the house. I hear my husband's feet thundering down the sweeping staircase, as fast as they can. He darts into the kitchen, and one look at my pale face drained of colour, the broken plate on the floor, and my shaking silhouette, he knows something is terribly wrong. "There was a big black face at the window, with yellow eyes," I explained to him. "But it's gone. It was looking at me. It was looking in at me. It was so scary. These huge eyes." My husband's expression looks cynical, as if he doubts my account. But to allay my fears, he grabs his rifle, investigates our yard. "I've seen a dark silhouette dashing through the farmer's field into the Woodgrove. I'm going to find out what it's all about," he tells me. I hear him loading his rifle. Please don't, I beg. You don't know what this thing is. What if it's a dangerous, aggressive predator? We don't know what we could be dealing with. Of course, my husband had ignored me. I watched in horror as he dashes through the meadow into the woodgrove. I wait and wait for my husband to return. It seems like time has stood still, as every click of the kitchen clock seems to move at an agonizingly slow pace. Finally, I see the welcome, familiar figure of my husband returning home through the woodgrove. He's getting closer and closer. He's now in the meadow. He'll be back home any second. The relief I feel is immeasurable. In the distance, I see 2 dark, or is it 3, shadowy creatures watching him. What the hell? I can see their yellow eye shine. As my husband gets ever closer, I discover he's carrying a newly born baby in his arms. I'm completely flabbergasted. I quickly cradle the baby. She's beautiful and tiny. But what is she doing in a woodgrove on her own? Where is the mother? This baby has only recently been born. It still has a small piece of umbilical cord attached to its belly button. To cut a long story short, the police never found out the origin of the mysterious baby. There were no reports of a baby going missing or being abducted. So how the Bigfoot female found that little baby is an enigmatic mystery. I am left to conclude that a young teenage girl gave birth to it and just abandoned it, possibly dumped it somewhere. Needless to say, we fell in love with the baby. We adopted her, along with 11 other children, in a very short period of time. It was exactly as Ruth had told us, told me, should I say, in my dream, that we would have a big family one day. Thankfully, we had the financial resources, the time, and the big home to have the large family we'd always dreamed of. Some things are clearly just meant to be. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.